Past and present. Prophecies and promises. Ogden Kraut. An acorn planted in the ground, if watered, nurtured, and tended, someday becomes a majestic creation, a mighty oak tree offering shade, protection and beauty. Likewise, the seeds of evil, once planted in fertile soil and tended with destructive but powerful fervor, grow into awesome creations, huge, hideous, gnarled monstrosities with rotten, mired roots that are hidden from view, and poisonous fruit that clings seductively to twisted branches. Millennium, Text Mars, page 221. There never was a set of men since God made the world under a stronger responsibility to warn this generation, to lift up our voices long and loud, day and night so far as we have the opportunity and declare the words of God unto this generation. We are required to do this. This is our calling. It is our duty. Wilfred Woodruff, J.D. 21-122. April 2000. Introduction. The Savior of the world bid all mankind to come follow him. And as the hymn says, he marked the path, and led the way, and every point defined. But although this path is easily marked, it is not so easily followed, and is certainly not very crowded. Nephi referred to this path, that he saw in a dream, ... There arose a mist of darkness, yea, even an exceeding great mist of darkness, insomuch that they who had commenced in the path did lose their way, that they wandered off and were lost. 1 Nephi 8:23. But in this dream a way was provided to get through the darkness, and fortunately there were some who found the iron rod, the word of God, and held on to it until they got through safely. In mortality the word of God serves as a guide, to help us throughout our lives. For us in America, the revealed principles of Americanism are the political part of the rod, and the eternal principles of Mormonism the spiritual part. Combined together they provide a strong iron rod. If we cling to this rod, we will reach the correct goal and partake of the fruit of the tree. But as the two sections of this book will show, many Americans and Mormons thought they knew a better path, and so they let go of the iron rod and began wandering in strange roads. 1:832. It is interesting to following these two parallel paths of government and church as they detour from the path Christ marked out for us. However, we do have the promise that after leading through dark mists, deep jungles, dangerous swamps, and barren deserts, the two paths will eventually return to the one marked by the Savior. However, he warned that, "Strait is the gate, and narrow is the way, which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it." Matt. 7:14. Hopefully, this book will help us recognize which path we are on both individually and collectively so we can make the necessary course corrections. Section 1. Americanism. Past, Present, Prophecies, Promises. Part 1. What was the hope for America? Freedom, faith, fortune. Introduction. During the most crucial hours of the revolution between the American colonists and the British, Thomas Paine penned that the cause of America is in a great measure the cause of all mankind. This is more true today than at any other time since 1776. If America should again become bathed in the blood of a revolution and anarchy, it will destroy the hopes of billions throughout the world, for such a downfall would be considered as the final curtain in the drama of human liberty. Dictatorships and totalitarian statism have tarnished the earth with more slave labor camps, torture chambers, and wholesale slaughtering than all of the primeval savages combined. Ironically, such oppressions are always in the name of humanitarianism or socialism. Such archaic systems of government need war to survive, since it is essential for them to loot, plunder and rape other nations of their prosperity. Socialism, Bolshevism, statism, and communism are nothing more than gang rule trying to conquer the world. America stands as the last major bulwark of freedom in the world, and if she sinks under wickedness and corrupt rulers, then the hopes and dreams of our founding fathers will be unfulfilled. Indeed, it was on this soil of freedom that the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ was able to take place. If America fails in fulfilling its destiny, then so will fall the arena for the free exercise of this gospel. Two forces contend for this land, God and the devil, and the contest is about to become a battlefield with one or the other as the final victor. God never moved more surely or more clearly in the ancient days of Israel, from the Red Sea down to Israel's last recorded victory, than in our struggle for independence. But he had decreed that America should be free, that liberty might find a dwelling place, to the end that his purposes might be worked out. The Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters of this new political world. Darkness rolled back, the light came, the day dawned, and there emerged from out the darkness into the bright sunlight of God's favor a new concept of human government. Out of the depths of eternal truth was born the Constitution of the United States. Gratitude for our heritage, J. Reuben Clark. pages 9 to 10. As early as in the 49th chapter of Genesis, the land of America was designated, and the destiny of her people foretold. The great patriarch Jacob singled out his son Joseph to bear the posterity that would come to this land of everlasting hills. The land and its people were to be blessed by the Lord with the precious things of heaven and earth, and it would become known as a land of plenty. From the records of the ancients it says, "Wherefore, this land is consecrated unto him whom he shall bring. And if it so be that they shall serve him according to the commandments which he hath given, it shall be a land of liberty unto them. Wherefore, they shall never be brought down into captivity. If so, it shall be because of iniquity. For if iniquity shall abound, cursed shall be the land for their sakes, but unto the righteous it shall be blessed forever." 2 Nevi 1:7. From this we learn that the land of America shall prosper when the people are righteous, and be cursed because of iniquity. The Founding Fathers. The Founding Fathers of America did not sacrifice their families, fortunes and lives for their own personal benefit and freedom. They gave up everything for the future of America. As men of foresight and brilliance, they realized what America could become, a land of the free, and an example for the rest of the world. It is difficult to find words to describe the greatness of our Founding Fathers and the masterful work they did. What a sharp contrast from those in office today. If Americans do not read their history and learn that comparison, they will be blinded by the lies and propaganda of today's political leaders. Part 1 of this first section on America presents a brief analysis of the caliber of men that were responsible for the founding of our nation. 4 men have been selected as examples of the noble and dedicated characters that formulated a nation that soon outshone all others. These pages will show who and what made America such a great nation of liberty. George Washington, 1732-1799. Engraving on the $1 federal note. There will assuredly come a day when this country will have some weight in the scales of empires. To the Marquis de Lafayette, Fitzpatrick, 1786, 28 520. George Washington was Adjutant General of the Virginia Militia, a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses, a member of the First and Second Continental Congress, Commander-in-Chief of the American Army, head of the Constitutional Congress, and the first President of the United States. George Washington fell naturally into both political and military powers of government, and his life was a story of sacrifice and dedication. The following is a brief overview of his life. George Washington, American soldier and statesman, the first President of the United States. Born in Wakefield, Virginia, February 22, 1732, the son of a well-to-do planter. His father's death cut short his avocation, and at 16 he began surveying for Lord Fairfax, an English landowner in Virginia. After the death of his brother, Lawrence, he became a major and adjutant general in the state militia and made his famous journey and campaign to Fort Duquesne, serving as Braddock's staff and leading the final attack. A member of the Virginia Assembly and of the First and Second Continental Congresses, he was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. He arrived at Boston, July 2, 1775, and displayed his genius for military administration by organizing an army and securing the expulsion of the English from Boston by March 1776. He crossed the Delaware and secured Trenton, and later Princeton. The winter of 1776-77 was spent in hardship in Valley Forge, Pa. In 1778 he recrossed NJ on his way to NY, fighting at Monmouth. Remaining near NY for 3 years, he then marched 400 miles to the aid of Lafayette at Yorktown and secured Cornwallis's surrender, October 19, 1781. Refusing the offer of a throne in America, he attended the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, 1787, over which he presided. He was sworn in as the first president of the U.S. at Federal Hall, New York City, April 30, 1799. He had no children of his own. He was buried at Mount Vernon, now a national shrine. New Modern Inc. Page 1120. Historian James Flexner wrote 5 volumes on Washington's life and concluded, Washington was a great and good man. In all history, few men who possessed unassailable power have used that power so gently and self-effacingly for what their best instincts told them was the welfare of their neighbors and all mankind. Washington, the indispensable man, page 16. There was a commitment and self-sacrificing objective in all of Washington's words and deeds that served as an example for the citizens who would follow him. His words of wisdom and hope for America were inspiring. For example, note the following quotes from John the 100th. Fitzpatrick's book George Washington Himself, 1933, Bobbs Merrill Publishers. America its prospects for greatness and happiness. The citizens of America, placed in the most enviable condition as the sole lords and proprietors of a vast tract of continent, comprehending all the various soils and climates of the world and abounding with all the necessaries and conveniences of life, are now, by the later satisfactory pacification, acknowledged to be possessed of absolute freedom and independence. They are, from this period, to be considered as the actors on a most conspicuous theater, which seems to be peculiarly designated by Providence for the display of human greatness and felicity. Here they are not only surrounded with everything which can contribute to the completion of private and domestic enjoyment, but heaven has crowned all its other blessings by giving a fairer opportunity for political happiness than any other nation has ever been favored with. Circular to the States, Fitzpatrick 26 484, 1783. If this country can steer clear of European politics and be wise and temperate in its government, it bids fair to be one of the greatest and happiest nations in the world. To Sarah Carey Fairfax. Fitzpatrick, 36 264, 1798. America, founded at a most auspicious time. The foundation of our empire was not laid in the gloomy age of ignorance and superstition, but at an epoch when the rights of mankind were better understood and more clearly defined than at any former period. The researches of the human mind after social happiness have been carried to a great extent. The treasures of knowledge, acquired by the labors of philosophers, sages, and legislatures through a long succession of years, are laid open for our use, and their collected wisdom may be happily applied in the establishment of our forms of government. General Orders, Fitzpatrick 26 335, 1783. The free cultivation of letters, the unbounded extension of commerce, the progressive refinement of manners, the growing liberality of sentiment, and, above all, the pure and benign light of revelation have had a meliorating influence on mankind and increased the blessings of society. At this auspicious period, the United States came into existence as a nation, and if their citizens should not be completely free and happy, the fault will be entirely their own. Circular to the States, Fitzpatrick 26 485, 1783. America, prosperous under new Constitution. Placed in a situation every way so auspicious, motives of commanding force impel us, with sincere acknowledgement to heaven and pure love to our country, to unite our efforts to preserve, prolong, and improve our immense advantages. 7th Annual Address to Congress, Fitzpatrick 34 389, 1795. America, an asylum for the oppressed. It is a flattering and consolatory reflection that our rising republics have the good wishes of all the philosophers, patriots, and virtuous men in all nations, and that they look upon them as a kind of asylum for mankind. God grant that we may not disappoint their honest expectations by our folly or perverseness. To the Marquis de Chastellux, Fitzpatrick 29 485, 1788. America, land of opportunity for all classes. It is a point conceded that America, under an efficient government, will be the most favorable country of any in the world for persons of industry and frugality, possessed of a moderate capital, to inhabit. It is also believed that it will not be less advantageous to the happiness of the lowest class of people, because of the equal distribution of property, the great plenty of unoccupied lands, and the facility of procuring the means of subsistence. To Richard Henderson, Fitzpatrick 29 520, 1788. America, to be an example to all the world. It should be the highest ambition of every American to extend his views beyond himself and to bear in mind that his conduct will not only affect himself, his country, and his immediate posterity, but that its influence may be coextensive with the world and stamp political happiness or misery on ages yet unborn. To establish this desirable end, and to establish government of laws, the union of these states is absolutely necessary. Therefore, in every proceeding, this important object should ever be kept in view, and so long as our measures tend to this, and are marked with the wisdom of a well-informed and enlightened people, we may reasonably hope, under the smiles of heaven, to convince the world that the happiness of nations can be accomplished by pacific revolutions in their political systems, without the destructive intervention of the sword. To the Legislature of Pennsylvania, Fitzpatrick 3395 N, 1789. America's future. The prospect of national prosperity now before us is truly animating, and ought to excite the exertions of all good men to establish and secure the happiness of their country in the permanent duration of its freedom and independence. America, Under the smiles of a divine providence, the protection of a good government, the cultivation of manners, morals, and piety can hardly fail of attaining an uncommon degree of eminence in literature, commerce, agriculture, improvements at home, and respectability abroad. To the Roman Catholics in the United States, Sparks 12-178, 1789. America, to be preserved by God. It is indeed a pleasure, from the walks of private life, to view in retrospect all the meanderings of our past labors, the difficulties through which we have waded, and the fortunate haven to which the ship has been brought. Is it possible after this, that it should founder? Will not the all-wise and all-powerful director of human events preserve it? I think he will. To Jonathan Trumbull, Fitzpatrick 27-399, 1784. When men are moved upon by the Holy Spirit, they are acting by the power of revelation, regardless of church, country or position. Lorenzo Snow stated. We look upon George Washington, the father of our country, as an inspired instrument of the Almighty. We can see the all-inspiring spirit operating upon him and upon his co-workers in resisting oppression and in establishing the 13 colonies as a confederacy, and then again the workings of the same spirit upon those men who established the Constitution of the United States. J.D. 14-304. These preceding quotations by George Washington show the brilliance of his mind, the dedication of his spirit, and his hope in America's future. He was an example for all other presidents to follow. His work and words stood the test of time, leaving a record that served as a standard in both military and civilian life. It was said of him, his conservatism, dignity and common sense set the precedent for the conduct of the nation and the presidential office. New Modern Inc. Page 1120. Thomas Jefferson. 1743-1826. Engraving on the $2 federal note. What a cruel reflection, that a rich country cannot long be a free one. Wisdom of Thomas Jefferson, E. Boykin, page 22. Thomas Jefferson was elected a delegate to the Continental Congress, was the chairman who drafted the Declaration of Independence, and served as governor of Virginia, minister to France, and Secretary of State. He became the third U.S. president. The writings of Thomas Jefferson have been compiled into over 25 volumes, yet he seldom spoke in Congress or before public audiences. His friend, John Adams, said he never heard him publicly speak more than 3 sentences together, but writing was his forte. It took him 17 days to write the Declaration of Independence, which every member of Congress signed under the words, "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes and our sacred honor." Thomas Jefferson was not a warrior who gained honors for his feats in bloody battles, but was a man endowed with the genius of ideals and principles far in advance of his time. Few men have ever been endowed with so many talents in the fields of art, science, religion, politics, philosophy, architecture, gardening, music, and law. He was an inventor, lawyer, mathematician, and even established our money system of dollars and cents. His personal library contained over 6,400 volumes which he later contributed to form the nucleus for our Library of Congress. One of the books he wrote was entitled The Life of Christ. He was familiar with languages such as French, Latin and Greek, and even wrote vocabularies of some Indian languages. Although Jefferson founded the Democratic Party, which eventually evolved into a Republican Party, he would not recognize either party today. He had inscribed on his ring seal the phrase, "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God." Another statement he was famous for was, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." The wisdom of Thomas Jefferson was unique because there was seldom an avenue of government to which he had not given considerable thought. The following are some of his gems of genius on government, as taken from the Wisdom of Thomas Jefferson by Edward Boykin. A small federal government. What has destroyed liberty and the rights of man in every government which has ever existed under the sun? The generalizing and concentrating all cares and powers into one body, no matter whether of the autocrats of Russia or France, or of the aristocrats of a Venetian Senate. Page 30. Responsibilities of government. Let the national government be entrusted with the defense of the nation and its foreign and federal relations, the state governments with the civil rights, laws, police, and administration of what concerns the state generally, the counties with the local concerns of the counties, and each ward direct the interests within itself. It is by dividing and subdividing these republics from the great national one down through all its subordinations until it ends in the administration of every man's farm by himself. Page 30. No foreign treaties or alignments. I am for free commerce with all nations, political connection with none, and little or no diplomatic establishment. And I am not for linking ourselves by new treaties with the quarrels of Europe, entering that field of slaughter to preserve their balance, or joining in the confederacy of kings to war against the principles of liberty. Page 24. A military only in time of war. I am for relying for internal defense on our militia solely, till actual invasion, and for such a naval force only as may protect our coasts and harbors from such depredations as we have experienced, and not for a standing army in time of peace, which may overawe the public sentiment, not for a navy, which, by its own expenses in the eternal wars in which it will implicate us, will grind us with public burdens, and sink us under them. Page 24. No public debt. I am for a government rigorously frugal and simple, applying all the possible savings of the public revenue to the discharge of the national debt, and not for a multiplication of officers and salaries merely to make partisans, and for increasing, by every device, the public debt, on the principle of its being a public blessing. Page 24. I wish it were possible to obtain a single amendment to our Constitution. I would be willing to depend on that alone for the reduction of the administration of our government to the genuine principles of its Constitution. I mean an additional article, taking from the federal government the power of borrowing. I now deny their power of making paper money, or anything else a legal tender. Page 97. I place economy among the first and most important of Republican virtues, and public debt is the greatest of all dangers to be feared. Page 83. A government of the people. I know of no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society, but the people themselves, and if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion by education. Page 153. Correct or change bad government. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter, or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form, as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. Page 117. No foreign wars. I have ever deemed it fundamental for the United States never to take part in the quarrels of Europe. Their political interests are entirely distinct from ours. Their mutual jealousies, their balance of power, their complicated alliances, their forms and principles of government, are all foreign to us. They are nations of eternal war. All their energies are expended in the destruction of the labor, property and lives. It should be that the meridian of the mid-Atlantic should be the line of demarcation between war and peace, on this side of which no act of hostility should be committed, and the lion and the lamb lie down in peace together. The European nations constitute a separate division of the globe. Their localities make them part of a distinct system. They have a set of interests of their own in which it is our business never to engage ourselves. America has a hemisphere to itself. It must have its separate system of interests, which must not be subordinated to those of Europe. The insulated state in which nature has placed the American continent should so far avail it that no spark of war kindled in the other quarters of the globe should be wafted across the wide oceans which separate us from them. Page 72. Representation by peace, not war. I love peace, and I am anxious that we should give the world still another useful lesson by showing to them other modes of punishing injuries than by war, which is as much a punishment to the punisher as to the sufferer. I love, therefore, the proposition of cutting off all communications with the nation, England, which has conducted itself so atrociously. This, you will say, may bring on war. If it does, we will meet it like men, but it may not bring on war, and then the experiment will have been a happy one. Page 64. Keep foreign powers out of our business. Our object is to introduce and establish the American system of keeping out of our land all foreign powers, of never permitting those of Europe to intermeddle with the affairs of our nations. It is to maintain our own principle, not to depart from it. And if, to facilitate this, we can effect a division in the body of the European powers and draw over to our side its most powerful member, surely we should do it. But I am clearly of Mr. Kenning's opinion that it will prevent instead of provoke war. Page 62. Keep our government out of affairs of business. Let the general government be reduced to foreign concerns only, and let our affairs be disentangled from those of all other nations, except as to commerce, which the merchants will manage the better, the more they are left free to manage for themselves, and our general government may be reduced to a very simple organization, and a very inexpensive one. A few plain duties, to be performed by a few servants. Page 33. Avoid taxation and debt. If we run into such debts, as that we must be taxed in our meat, and in our drink, in our necessaries and our comforts, in our labors and our amusements, for our callings and our creeds, as the people of England are, our people, like them, must come to labor 16 hours in the 24, give the earnings of 15 of these to the government for their debts and daily expenses, and the 16th being insufficient to afford us bread, we must live, as they now do, on oatmeal and potatoes, have no time to think, no means of calling the mismanagers to account, but be glad to obtain subsistence by hiring ourselves to rivet their chains on the necks of our fellow sufferers. Page 94. Taxes only for specific reasons. With respect to debts, whether to be met by loans or taxes, there are two laws of finance which I think should be rigorously adhered to. 1. Never to borrow without laying a tax sufficient to pay principal and interest within a fixed period, and I would fix that period at 10 years. 2. Never to borrow or tax without appropriating the money to its specific object. Page 96. Take not from the mouth of labor the bread it is earned. Page 54. Avoid federal extravagance. Private fortunes are destroyed by public as well as by private extravagance. And this is the tendency of all human governments. A departure from principle in one instance becomes a precedent for a second, that second for a third, and so on, till the bulk of the society is reduced to be mere automations of misery, to have no sensibilities left but for sinning and suffering. Taxation follows that, and in its train wretchedness and depression. Page 94. The priceless value of liberty. When we reflect that the eyes of the virtuous all over the earth are turned with anxiety on us, as the only depositories of the sacred fire of liberty. Page 7. The God who gave us life gave us liberty at the same time. Page 126. I would rather be exposed to the inconveniences attending too much liberty than those attending too small a degree of it. Page 101. The ball of liberty, I believe most piously, is now so well in motion that it will roll around the globe, at least the enlightened part of it, for light and liberty go together. Page 142. Several years ago, according to a news broadcast, a great banquet was held at the White House for many great intellectuals of the nation. When John F. Kennedy got up to speak, he said, "There has never been such a collection of intelligence in this room since Thomas Jefferson sat here eating alone." The hand of Providence is evident even in Jefferson's death. Through the night he was partly delirious. At 11 o'clock his lips moved slightly, and then he lost consciousness. At 12:50 noon he passed on. It was July 4, 1826, just 50 years, to the day, after the Declaration of Independence. At that same moment in Quincy, Massachusetts, Jefferson's dear friend, John Adams, was also dying. Adams, too, spoke softly, and his last words were, "Thomas Jefferson still survives." While bands played and the streets were filled with parades and crowds celebrating the 50th anniversary of American independence, Jefferson and Adams slipped quietly to the other shore. Such unusual incidents in the pages of history do not occur by coincidence, for they strangely but clearly portray the concern of an all-seeing Providence who watches with particular interest in his chosen sons of liberty. Men and Monuments of Freedom, Kraut, page 98. Benjamin Franklin. 1706-1790. Engraving on the $100 federal note. Our new Constitution is now established and has an appearance that promises permanency. But in this world nothing can be said to be certain, except death and taxes. Letter to Jean-Baptiste Leroy, November 13, 1789. Benjamin Franklin was sent to London as a delegate of the Pennsylvania Assembly, served in the Continental Congress, took the historic trip to France to secure vital financial and military aid for the American Revolution, was elected president of Pennsylvania, and was a member of the Constitutional Convention. This brief synopsis of the life of Benjamin Franklin will lay the groundwork for his words of wisdom to follow. Benjamin Franklin, 1706-1790, American statesman and philosopher. Born in Boston, moved to Philadelphia when 17, and became the outstanding printer and journalist of the colonies through his Pennsylvania Gazette and Richard Saunders' Poor Richard's Almanac. Active in city affairs, he sponsored the organization of police, fire, and militia companies, the first public library, and an academy, now the University of Pennsylvania. He identified lightning with electricity, and this and other researches won him membership in every important learned society in Europe. Franklin began his diplomatic career in 1757 at the age of 51 and spent most of his remaining 33 years in that work. He was in London as delegate of the PA Assembly, speaking and securing the king's permission to tax the pen estates. He spent a second period in London vainly opposing the arbitrary taxation of the colonies, served for a short time in the Continental Congress, and then undertook his historic mission to France, on which he secured vital military and financial aid for the American Revolution. On his return, he was twice elected president of PA and served as a member of the Constitutional Convention. New Modern Inc. Page 376. Life in the 1700s was not easy even in the best of conditions, due to poverty, hostile environment, difficulty with Indians, and war. Franklin was described as a great and wise man moving through many challenging and troubling events with versatility, insight, and adaptability. He constantly wrote down his views in publications and correspondence, and today Yale University Library has amassed over 40,000 pieces of this material. Franklin was the most appealing and exemplary of the American founders. He was an American's American. His activities spanned nearly every phase of life, finding the liberty and intuitiveness to improve upon it. As a publisher, printer, author, scientist, businessman, politician, moralist, sage, diplomat, and patriot, he loved and defended America. He was successful in business, and his ingenious inventions gained world recognition, many still being used today. It was his worldly wisdom and winning charm that earned him the respect of not only the common man, but also kings and rulers of nations. The following examples of his words of wisdom to fellow and future Americans are taken from Poor Richard's Almanac: eat to live, and not live to eat. Keep your eyes wide open before marriage, half shut afterwards. Lost time is never found again. Work as if you were to live 100 years, pray as if you were to die tomorrow. The cat in gloves catches no mice. God helps them that help themselves. There are 3 faithful friends: an old wife, an old dog, and ready money. A word to the wise is enough, and many words won't fill a bushel. He that lives upon hope will die fasting. After 3 days men grow weary of a wench, a guest, and weather rainy. Experience keeps a dear school, but fools will learn in no other. The used key is always bright. When the well's dry, we know the worth of water. A little house well filled, a little field well tilled, and a little wife well willed are great riches. Necessity never made a good bargain. 3 may keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Here comes the orator, with his flood of words and his drop of reason. If you would not be forgotten, as soon as you are dead and rotten, either write things worthy reading, or do things worth the writing. There never was a good war or a bad peace. Benjamin Franklin had great respect for George Washington and commented, George Washington, commander of the American armies, who, like Joshua of old, commanded the sun and the moon to stand still, and they obeyed him. A toast at a dinner in Versailles. Franklin was no soldier, nor did he care to be. He despised war, and couldn't understand why so many thought it was such a noble enterprise. He placed more virtue in producing life than trying to snuff it out, and he wrote, men I find to be a sort of being very badly constructed, as they are generally more easily provoked than reconciled, more disposed to do mischief to each other than to make reparation, much more easily deceived than undeceived, and having more pride and even pleasure in killing than begetting one another. For without a blush they assemble in great armies at noonday to destroy, and when they have killed as many as they can, they exaggerate the number to augment the fancied glory. But they creep into corners, or cover themselves with the darkness of night, when they mean to beget, as being ashamed of a virtuous action. A virtuous action it would be, and a vicious one the killing of them, if the species were really worth producing or preserving. But of this, I begin to doubt. Franklin of Philadelphia, Esmond Wright, page 352. Benjamin Franklin was given the name of the sage, which definitely fit him. Like Jefferson, he was a master of many arts and trades. His abilities were so diversified that he was concerned over matters from statesmanship to soap making, from book printing to cabbage growing, and from the rise of tides to the fall of nations. He came from a family of 15 children and was the only boy. At 24 he started his own newspaper. He also published Poor Richard's Almanac, which sold 10,000 copies annually. When he straightened out the postal mess in Philadelphia, they made him postmaster. He organized a fire department, reformed the police department, established the American Philosophical Society, and formed the University of Philadelphia. As an inventor, his discoveries were unequaled up to the time of Thomas Edison. He invented bifocal glasses, the lightning rod, and the Franklin heating stove, but not the Franklin planner. He made discoveries in oceanography, meteorology, and medicine. He was honored by both American and European colleges. It has been stated that he was the most successful diplomat that America ever sent abroad. His wisdom and wit, tact, and courtesy made him the most famous American of his time. He was the only man who signed all 4 of the key documents in early American history. After the struggle for American independence, a terrible debate and serious contention arose over the kind of constitution that should be written. Washington had given up on anything being written when Franklin arose and said, "I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without his concurring aid we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel." Writings of Benjamin Franklin, Vol. 7, page 196. Franklin's advice was taken, prayer became established in the halls of Congress, and a new constitution was written which surpassed any other constitution. Among Franklin's many comments about the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence were, "We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately." At the signing of the Declaration of Independence, July 4, 1776, referring to the emblem as sunburst on the president's chair, "I have often in the course of this session, and the vicissitudes of my hopes and fears as to its issue, looked at that behind the president without being able to tell whether it was rising or setting. But now at length I have the happiness to know that it is a rising and not a setting sun." Report of the Constitutional Convention, September 17, 1787, as the last members of the convention signed the Constitution. In Philadelphia, a Mrs. Powell asked Dr. Franklin, "Well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" "A republic," replied the doctor, "if you can keep it." On choosing a national bird to represent America, he stated, "I wish the bald eagle had not been chosen as the representative of our country. He is a bird of bad moral character. Like those among men who live by sharping and robbing, he is generally poor, and often very lousy. The turkey. Is a much more respectable bird, and withal a true original native of America." Letter to Sarah Batch, January 26, 1784. At Franklin's death, he was recognized for the genius that he really was. Antiquity would have raised altars to this mighty genius, who, to the advantage of mankind, compassing in his mind the heavens and the earth, was able to restrain alike thunderbolts and tyrants. Mirabeau, Address upon the Death of Franklin. Esmond Wright wrote an extensive book on the life of Benjamin Franklin, and it later became nationally recognized for such extensive research. For an Englishman, it was interesting that he gave such praise to the man who had part in making war against England. He observed, "Why then, in the 20th century, do we honor Benjamin Franklin? We do so, first, as we do George Washington, because he was so successful not only for himself, but for his country and his cause." He was indeed described, in 1764, as the first American, a term later transferred to Washington. We have no choice but to salute a career as successful in every way as was Franklin's. From lowly origins, and with no advantages except his own native talent, he achieved unusual material prosperity, so that he could, as he thought, retire at the age of 42. He went on to a public career of great distinction, as scientist, statesman, and diplomat, honored abroad and at home. He was successful as a colonial agent, as part author of the Declaration of Independence, as writer and molder of opinion, as founding father. Even more than Washington's, Franklin's career was self-made. Conspicuously more than Washington, he was familiar with two worlds. He passed the active years of his life almost equally in the Old World and the New. He was honored in Europe as no American had been until then, and as, indeed, no American has been since. Benjamin Franklin of Philadelphia, page 354. Franklin's death came in 1790 at the age of 89. With all his accomplishments, inventions, and contributions to mankind, his humble attitude was reflected in his will when he wrote, "I, Benjamin Franklin, printer." The body of Benjamin Franklin, printer, like the cover of an old book, its contents worn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding, lies here, food for worms. Yet the work itself shall not be lost, for it will, as he believed, appear once more in a new and more beautiful edition, corrected and amended by its author. Few men ever contributed so much to their city, their state, or their nation as did Benjamin Franklin. Andrew Jackson. 1767-1845. Engraving on the $20 federal note. The president rumbled around the White House in a fit of rage. "You are a den of vipers," he said to a delegation of the bank supporters. "I intend to rout you out, and by the eternal God I will rout you out." The Creature from Jekyll Island, G. Edward Griffin, page 355. Jackson was ambitious but practical, even at an early age. He became a lawyer at 19, United States Attorney at 23, Congressman at 29, U.S. Senator at 30, and Justice of the Supreme Court of Tennessee at 31. He also was Major General of the Tennessee Militia, a Major General of the U.S. Army, Territorial Governor, and finally 7th President of the United States. There is not enough written or taught about Andrew Jackson, yet he represented one of the great men of our time. Donald Barr Chidsey, author of the book Andrew Jackson, Hero, after spending a tremendous amount of time learning all he could about him, gained such a deep respect for the man that he continually referred to Jackson as the hero. From a brief sketch of his life, the following was written in an encyclopedia. The War of 1812 brought Jackson the opportunity to distinguish himself as a military hero in a way that made him not only a national figure but an international celebrity. In 1813 he led the Tennessee militia in a victorious expedition against the hostile Creek Indians in Alabama. In this campaign he displayed such military skill that he was awarded a commission as Major General in the regular Army of the United States. On January 8, 1815, he won a crushing victory over the British under Gen. Sir Edward Pakenham at the Battle of New Orleans, the battle that sealed the independence of the United States. In 1817, under orders from the Secretary of War to pursue the Seminoles across the border, but not beyond the Spanish posts, General Jackson marched into Florida with a strong detachment and seized the Spanish fort at St. Mark's, dispersed the insurrectionary Indians. The Florida Territory was soon thereafter acquired from Spain by the United States, and in 1821 Jackson was back in Pensacola as territorial governor. In 1828 he was nominated President of the United States. On the whole, Jackson's first term as president was popular with the people, and in 1832 he was elected to a second term by an overwhelming majority, 219 electoral votes to 49 to Henry Clay. By 1835 he had paid off the national debt for the first and only time in the history of the United States, and when he retired from the presidency at the conclusion of his second term in 1837, he left a surplus in the federal treasury. American People's Inc. 10-432-33. When Tennessee was admitted to the Union, he was on the committee to draft a state constitution, which Jefferson said was the most perfect of any that had been written. Jefferson and Jackson had little in common except they both hated public speaking. When they spoke or mumbled, they usually had their head down, and no one past the second row could understand what they said. Jackson was a great admirer of Jefferson, but Jefferson thought Jackson was too much of a wild man to run for the presidency. However, in spite of their character differences, they both deeply loved America and the Constitution. In the long run, Jackson did not prove to be such a wild man while serving as U.S. president, as the election polls demonstrated. In his second term he got over 4 times more votes than his opponent, Henry Clay. Many were worried about Jackson's being capable of handling foreign affairs because he had trouble controlling his temper. They admired him as a soldier, a planter, a domestic arbiter, but he was questionable as a statesman. Among friends, enemies or fellow countrymen his temper could be avoided, tolerated or ignored. But what would he do with foreign diplomats? As it turned out, he learned to take perfect control and acted with as much diplomacy as anyone else. Although he was a boy during the Revolutionary War, he joined a battle and was captured by the British, where their treatment of him as a prisoner caused him to intensely dislike them for the rest of his life. He was a natural military leader and became the hero of both the Creek War and the War of 1812. The crack British soldiers at New Orleans had the misfortune of meeting General Jackson, and during that battle the British lost nearly 2,500 men, while Jackson lost only 8, with 13 wounded. The British claimed it was not a fair battle, it was a massacre. Jackson was a born fighter And when he walked into the presidential office, he still had 2 bullets in him to prove it. Historians have hailed Napoleon Bonaparte as a military genius, but in reality he lost more battles than he won. Many military leaders in America, such as Jackson, have proved just as great. For instance, General George S. Patton took more cities, captured more prisoners, and seized more land than any military commander in history, and he never lost a battle. Anything but kindly, Jackson always was solicitous about his men. He saw to it that they were properly fed, and that the sick were cared for, and that they all got their pay on time. The men appreciated that, but most of their admiration was for his tenacity, his durability. He could sure take it. It was known that he was painfully ill all this while, and at times could hardly hold himself upright in the saddle, yet he seemed never to sleep. He led the men personally through the hardest places, and he listened to every complaint. It was at this time that they began to call him after the toughest wood that they knew. They called him Old Hickory. Andrew Jackson, hero, child say, page 35. This tough label seemed to fit all of his family. Even his wife smoked a corncob pipe, but she was deeply religious. Once a young boy asked his Sunday school teacher if President Jackson would go to heaven. The teacher quickly replied, "He will if he wants to." Jackson carried a bullet for nearly 30 years in his upper arm. When it began to work its way towards the surface, he called in his friend, the Surgeon General, to cut it out. He rolled up his sleeve, and without taking any painkiller, he simply stood there watching the operation. When the ball fell to the floor, he picked it up and gave it to a friend for a souvenir and promptly went back to work at his desk. Many Mormon leaders have recognized the wisdom and greatness of Andrew Jackson. Joseph Smith, in continuation of such noble sentiments, General Jackson, upon his ascension to the great chair of the chief magistracy, said, "As long as our government is administered for the good of the people and is regulated by their will, as long as it secures to us the rights of person and property, liberty of conscience, and of the press, it will be worth defending. And so long as it is worth defending, a patriotic militia will cover it with an impenetrable aegis." Powers and Policies of Governor, page 13. Jedediah M. Grant, did you ever hear such a man as Judge Shaver threaten us with the United States? Did you ever hear Judge Reed do such a thing? No. Or Millard Fillmore or Andrew Jackson? No. Such men would scorn to threaten an innocent people with the armies of the nation. JD 3-235. Ezra Taft Benson, the Bible is the rock on which this republic rests, Andrew Jackson proclaimed. Conf. Rept. April 1963, page 110. 1832 Prophecy. During 1830-31, the feature stories of the American press carried news of a threatened civil war. The controversy was over the question of nullification. Did South Carolina have the right to nullify the new federal tariff law? The obvious effect of such a right would be the annihilation of the powers of Congress. If South Carolina could nullify a federal law, so could other states. It would be the end of the Union. Andrew Jackson was president, and the political leaders of all parties waited anxiously to see what he would do. If he bowed meekly to this spirit of rebellion, other states would follow. If he dispatched an army to South Carolina to enforce the federal law, many predicted strong and immediate military resistance. President Jackson was not a church man, but he was a praying man. In this moment of national crisis, he was pleading for divine guidance. Would there be civil war? What could he do to avoid it? The president did not ask for a revelation, merely wisdom. As subsequent events clearly proved, his prayers were answered. His wisdom averted civil war in the United States for a whole generation. But the prayers of President Jackson were more completely, though indirectly, answered through a divine manifestation which warned the people of the United States that eventually civil war would engulf the nation. The revelation was not received in the White House, nor did it come to the president. It came to a humble young man, 27 years of age, who was residing at Kirtland, Ohio. His name was Joseph Smith. Prophecy in Modern Times, Cleon Skousen, pages 1-2. Neither Andrew Jackson nor George Washington had a college education. Both found writing in agony, and both were poor spellers, but it didn't really matter, because they had men around them that would take care of those tasks. When Jackson was invited by Harvard to accept an honorary Doctor of Law degree, John Quincy Adams declined the invitation to attend a ceremony because he wrote that he could not witness the disgrace of conferring her highest literary honors upon a barbarian who could not write a sentence of grammar and could hardly spell his own name. However, education does not always indicate wisdom. There has been a constant flow of intellectual graduates from Harvard and other colleges, but in reality they have been more of a detriment to our country. Most buildings at Harvard bear the name of some banker. Nearly every noble cause and every good man have opponents and enemies seen or unseen. Naturally, a strong man like Jackson would create enemies. For example, once while he was on a steamer, a man by the name of Randolph came up to him and hit him in the face. The captain grabbed the intruder and hustled him out on the deck and down the gangplank into a crowd of people who heard what had happened. They surrounded him, beat on him, and threatened to kill him, but the president said no to killing him. He didn't want anyone doing something he could do himself. Jackson said he would like to meet him sometime with the weapon of his choice, but Randolph disappeared. Later, an English painter came out of a crowd, pointed a pistol at Jackson, pulled the trigger but it misfired. He quickly reloaded, but once again it misfired. But Jackson had time to react. Andrew Jackson, not impeded this time by a low ceiling, raised his walking stick and charged, bellowing in rage. His naval aide, Lieutenant Gedney, was even faster. Gedney clipped the man in the jaw, knocking him down, and then fell upon him, an act that quite possibly saved the poor fool's life and certainly spared him a caning. It was the first time anybody had tried to assassinate a president of the United States. Lawrence, who kept telling everybody that he was a member of the British royal family, was sent to a lunatic asylum. Andrew Jackson always declared that both of these assaults were the work of thugs hired by the Bank of the United States. Andrew Jackson, hero, page 179. We will discuss more about this bank later, as well as his reason for such an accusation. Jackson was a hard money man, opposed to the paper money system. He and the prophet Joseph Smith, his contemporary, agreed on this, for Joseph stated, "Situated as we are, with a flood of immigration constantly pouring in upon us, I consider that it is not only prudential, but absolutely necessary to protect the inhabitants of this city from being imposed upon by spurious currency." Many of our Eastern and Old Country friends are altogether unacquainted with the situation of the banks in this region of country, and as they generally bring specie with them, they are perpetually in danger of being gulled by speculators. Besides, there is so much uncertainty in the solvency of the best of banks that I think it much safer to go upon the hard money system altogether. I have examined the Constitution upon this subject and find my doubts removed. The Constitution is not a law, but it empowers the people to make laws. The different states, and even Congress itself, have passed many laws diametrically contrary to the Constitution of the United States. The state of Illinois has passed a stay law making property a lawful tender for the payment of debts, and if we have no law on the subject we must be governed by it. Shall we be such fools as to be governed by its laws, which are unconstitutional? No. We will make a law for gold and silver, and then the state law ceases, and we can collect our debts. Powers not delegated to the states or reserved from the states are constitutional. The Constitution acknowledges that the people have all power not reserved to itself. DHC 5 289-290. Jackson made every attempt to clean up the government and was not afraid to make a move when he saw the need. Old Hickory looked around. From 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C., it was hard to see anything that still needed walloping, for he seemed already to have won whatever he wanted. But he persisted, and when he remembered the Bank of the United States, he gave a whoop of battle joy and waded in, both arms swinging. Now he was happy again. Andrew Jackson, hero, page 120. Jackson made an order to cease depositing federal funds in the Bank of the United States so that the bank would dry up. He could not understand why the government should keep on feeding money into a private corporation that was unconstitutional anyway. When he ordered the Secretary of the Treasury to cease depositing public money in the Bank of the United States, the secretary refused, so the president fired him. In 1815 the bank was revived for 20 more years for $35 million, 1/5 of which was to be owned by the government and 4/5 by the public. Of the $28 million that was in private hands, more than 1/4 was owned by foreigners. The bank soon became the largest corporation in the United States, even one of the largest in the world. Enter Andrew Jackson, the new president. He sent his first message to Congress, a message that was a virtual declaration of war against the bank. Alexander Hamilton thought that the rich should be lured into government positions, or at least have influence on its operations. John Jay was of the same opinion, thinking that since the rich owned the country, they should also run it. This kind of thinking brought into being the privately owned monster called the Bank of the United States, which would handle the government's money. The Jeffersonians were horrified at the thought, believing that the Constitution said what it meant, no more, no less. Such a bank would be a violation of the Constitution and would invite national crimes of theft in power. We are told that figures don't lie, but liars certainly figure. These high priests of the inner financial circles could throw a smokescreen over their real intentions better than the best of salesmen. They could even make debt look like a blessing, and they still do. In fact, they knew how to create debt, public and national, even if they had to create a war to do it. President Andrew Jackson overthrew the Second Bank of the United States when he exposed the fact that the majority of the stock was held by foreign interests. Such banking, he said in his veto message of July 10, 1832, was unauthorized by the Constitution, subversive of the rights of the states, and dangerous to the liberties of the people. By the end of his last term in office, he was growing weak and suffered many aches and pains. He was nearly 67 years old, but he could look back upon his life and consider his victories, along with the storms and setbacks, with some inner pride and a twinkle in his eye. The national debt had been eliminated at the time he said it would, and most of all, he had won the battle with the bank. Now there was his greatest triumph. He had slain the monster of Chestnut Street, decreeing as he did, so that the United States should take care of its own money instead of entrusting it to the care of private bankers. Posterity would see this deed in its proper light and would thank him for it, no matter how the Eastern millionaires might growl. Yes, he had managed to do many things that badly needed doing, but the greatest achievement of them all was the skewering of the United States Bank. Andrew Jackson, hero, page 201. Soon Martin Van Buren sat in the presidential chair, and Old Hickory was replaced by Slippery Elm. From that time on, the government would continually be in debt. What is worse, it would be in bondage to the bank. Our hero had gone to Washington, D.C., to be president with $5,000 in his pocket. 8 years later he returned home with only $90, and he was not even entitled to a retirement pension. However, he left a rich heritage for all who would appreciate it. No president since then has been able to set such a noble example. America's Constitution. What made America greater than every other country? Was it because she was larger, because she had more riches, because of the people, because of the climate or better soil? In reality, it was none of these, although they are contributing factors. It was mainly because of the freedom and liberty promised to her citizens, because of its Constitution. Oliver Wendell Holmes once wrote, "The American Constitution is the most wonderful work ever struck off at a given time by the brain and purpose of man." Familiar quotations, Bartlett, page 534. Unfortunately, the Constitution is not taught extensively in our schools nor churches, nor in state or federal agencies. Even those who study for years to become lawyers spend very few hours studying the Constitution. In spite of such limited information given to citizens about this important document, every person employed by the government, either civil or military, must raise his hand and swear to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign or domestic. According to Thomas Jefferson, the reason the Founding Fathers made this requirement was in questions of power. Then, let no more be said of confidence in man, but bind him down for mischief by the chains of the Constitution. The Constitution, the definitive edition, page 40. Those who study it most love it best. In 1833 the Lord said, "And for this purpose have I established the Constitution of this land, by the hands of wise men whom I raised up unto this very purpose, and redeemed the land by the shedding of blood." D&C 100-180. If God raised up wise men to give us the Constitution, why are some people now claiming it is out of date, it is an old rag, and that it is no longer needed? Can freedom be outdated? By the same token, are the 10 Commandments no longer effective? Can laws of morality and honesty be changed by time? The Constitution limits the powers of government, so they can't destroy the free agency and liberty of the people. Why, then, do its leaders want to take away free agency and liberty? The answer is simple: they thirst for power and control. It is an old story retold over and over, not just in novels, but throughout the pages of actual history. Regardless of the positive comments that foreigners and Native Americans have made about the Constitution, let's reflect upon what the prophet Joseph Smith has said. Hence we say that the Constitution of the United States is a glorious standard. It is founded in the wisdom of God. It is a heavenly banner. It is to all those who are privileged with the sweets of liberty, like the cooling shades and refreshing waters of a great rock in a thirsty and weary land. It is like a great tree under whose branches men from every clime can be shielded from the burning rays of the sun. TPJS, page 147. We say that God is true, that the Constitution of the United States is true, that the Bible is true, that the Book of Mormon is true, that the Book of Covenants is true, that Christ is true, that the ministering angels sent forth from God are true, and that we know that we have an house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens, whose builder and maker is God. TPJS, page 148. It is one of the first principles of my life, and one that I have cultivated from my childhood, having been taught it by my father, to allow everyone the liberty of conscience. I am the greatest advocate of the Constitution of the United States there is on the earth. In my feelings, I am always ready to die for the protection of the weak and oppressed in their just rights. The only fault I find with the Constitution is, it is not broad enough to cover the whole ground. TPJS, page 326. The Constitution is not law to us, but it makes provision for us whereby we can make laws. Where it provides that no one shall be hindered from worshiping God according to his own conscience, is a law. No legislature can enact a law to prohibit it. The Constitution provides to regulate bodies of men and not individuals. 1843, DHC 5 289-290. The different states, and even Congress itself, have passed many laws diametrically contrary to the Constitution of the United States. The state of Illinois has passed a stay law making property a lawful tender for the payment of debts, and if we have no law on the subject, we must be governed by it. Shall we be such fools as to be governed by its laws, which are unconstitutional? No. TPJS, page 279. The Constitution should contain a provision that every officer of the government who should neglect or refuse to extend the protection guaranteed in the Constitution should be subject to capital punishment. TPJS, page 327. It is fitting at this point to add a couple of comments by Dr. Hugh Nibley, whose genius in research in the study of nations, languages and people is worthy of serious consideration by both LDS members and non-members alike. Both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States contain statements of general principles along with specific and particular provisions for their implementation. The principles are the really important thing. Both documents specifically render back to God those rights of judgment and execution which men had usurped. That is why both have a strongly negative tone. Hands off is the theme. There are certain rights which all men enjoy, which the Creator himself has declared inalienable, and with which no man or group of men has any right to interfere. Men may check and admonish each other in their little affairs, but where the great decisions of life are concerned, God alone is the judge. That is the key to the whole thing. In God we trust. The founding fathers did trust God. They trusted him enough to give back to him and him alone the right to judge the hearts and minds of men. The World and the Prophets, Nibley, pages 187-188. It is more than 4th of July rhetoric when the Latter-day Saints declare that the Constitution is an inspired document. It actually is the restoration to the earth of that ancient law of liberty which has been preached by the prophets in every age, allowing every man to act in doctrine and principle according to the moral agency which God has given him. Ibid. Page 190. The founding fathers were willing to sacrifice all they had to achieve a strong foundation for this country and to establish a government that would guarantee rights and freedoms for its citizens. They intended that it should serve as a hope and example for the rest of the world. They gave the best they had with a desire that we would continue to maintain and protect these principles of liberty. But now let's review what Americans have actually done with this legacy. Part 2. What has become of America? Crime, corruption, conspiracy. Introduction. And he had sworn in his wrath unto the brother of Jared, that whoso should possess this land of promise, from that time henceforth and forever, should serve him, the true and only God, or they should be swept off when the fullness of his wrath should come upon them. Either 2:8. America is a land of blessings. It has become famous for its wealth, freedom, and protection. The Lord has called it choice above all other lands. It has been revealed that the Garden of Eden was located on this, the American continent, not in Mesopotamia. It was in America that the city of Enoch was built, and Methuselah and other great Bible patriarchs lived here. It was in America that Noah built his ark to begin repopulating the world. Nearly 2,000 years ago, the Savior visited America after his resurrection and established his church and kingdom in this hemisphere. So the people of America have a great heritage, a great responsibility, and a great destiny. Moses was told that, if the children of Israel were faithful to the Lord, that they would be led to a land which he promised them. Deut. 9:28. See also 19:8, that thou mayst go in unto the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, a land that floweth with milk and honey, as the Lord God of thy fathers hath promised thee. Deut. 27:3. Notice that the Lord told them it was a land which he promised them, but Lehi and his family were led to a land of promise. Nephi 2:20, one reference was to a land promised them, the other to a land of promise. When Father Jacob gave his patriarchal blessing upon his 12 sons, he gave a special blessing upon Joseph, that his posterity branches would run over the wall ocean to a land of everlasting hills. Gen. 49:22 and 26, it was to this house of Jacob, who would come to America, that God gave such great blessings, for his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Even by the God of thy father, who shall help thee, and by the Almighty, who shall bless thee with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that leave under, blessings of the breasts, and of the womb, the blessings of thy father, have prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors. Gen. 49:24-26. America was the land of heritage for this house of Joseph, the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. God's laws were to prevail upon America for his chosen, so that he could bless them now and forever. But America's greatness is not because of her riches, power, or scientific advancements. America's greatness is because of her righteousness. In 1835, a French visitor, by the name of Alexis de Tocqueville, made a detailed study of our national operations. Later he wrote in his book, America is great, because she is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, she will cease to be great. This is a divine law that applies to all nations and to all individuals. But it applies particularly to us because our extraordinary power and our extraordinary mission give us extraordinary responsibilities. Sterling W. Sill, Imp. Era, December 1970, pages 79-80. America has been blessed more than any other nation. Therefore, Americans should be the most appreciative and the most righteous of all people. On the other hand, if they sin against the greater light, their condemnation will be all the more severe. If they fail to be obedient, then they will receive his cursings. But behold, when the time cometh, that they shall dwindle in unbelief, after they have received so great blessings from the hand of the Lord, having a knowledge of the creation of the earth, and all men, knowing the great and marvelous works of the Lord from the creation of the world, having power given them to do all things by faith, having all the commandments from the beginning, and having been brought by his infinite goodness into this precious land of promise, behold, I say, if the day shall come, that they will reject the Holy One of Israel, the true Messiah, their Redeemer and their God, behold, the judgments of him that is just shall rest upon them. 2 Nephi 1:10. Most of us have heard the story of the little Dutch boy, Hans Klinker, who saw a small leak in a dike. It was no larger than his finger, but he knew, if it were not stopped, it would grow larger and larger until the dike would break. So he put his finger, and then his whole fist, in the hole to stop the leak until help could arrive. Little Hans became a hero, because he saved the town from being flooded. Likewise, many years ago, America experienced a small leak with the inception of crime, corruption and conspiracies, but no Hans Klinker appeared on the scene to save the country from the inevitable flood of destruction. So these evils have grown silently, powerfully and unchecked, until today they have overtaken our nation. America the Beautiful has become America the Ugly. To the Nephites, Jesus prophesied the destiny of America, and thus commanded the Father, that I should say unto you, at that day when the Gentiles shall sin against my gospel, and shall be lifted up in the pride of their hearts above all nations, and above all the people of the whole earth, and shall be filled with all manner of lyings, and of deceits, and of mischiefs, and all manner of hypocrisy, and murders, and priestcrafts, and whoredoms, and of secret abominations. And if they shall do all those things, and shall reject the fullness of my gospel, behold, said the Father, I will bring the fullness of my gospel from among them. 3 Nephi 16:10. In summary, 1. The Gentiles shall sin against his gospel. 2. They will have pride greater than other nations. 3. They will be filled with lyings, deceits, mischiefs, priestcrafts, and murder. 4. They will have secret combinations. 5. They will reject the fullness of the gospel. It is evident that America is filled with crime, corruption, and conspiracies, and these conditions will eventually bring great judgments upon her inhabitants. It shall be a salt that hath lost its savor, which is thenceforth good for nothing but to be cast out, and to be trodden under foot. 3 Na. 16:15, the saber represents the Spirit of the Lord. So let's consider each of these three major areas of wickedness, the three C's, that have become so destructive to this land of promise. 1. Crime. Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Proverbs 14:34. Sin and crime are wicked sisters. Sin is transgressing the law of God and crime is transgressing the law of man. They are tools used by the master deceiver to ruin and destroy both man and nations. Crime is a problem that is evident in every nation and is frequently in the nature of mankind. As both good and bad organizations increase their membership, they increase their power. Organized crime can become a monster and can easily get out of the control of police and politicians. Corrupt organizations gain their power and wealth from such activities as gambling, smuggling, stealing, prostitution, counterfeiting, blackmail, murder, and drugs. But an even greater threat comes when they begin to take over legitimate businesses in order to corrupt them as well. Criminal combinations around the world have threatened, destroyed, and taken over legitimate businesses. Organized crime did not begin here in America, it was imported. The roots of criminal brotherhood grew up in the two Mediterranean cities of Naples and Palermo. These families of crime immigrated to America, slithering through its portals like deadly snakes. Taking advantage of its opportunities for liberty and freedom, they introduced their nefarious corruption. It is not necessary to review all these different organizations of criminal activities, but a couple of their leaders will represent the whole. Al Capone and John Gotti. Alphonse Capone. Al Capone, known as Scarface, was born in Naples, Italy, in 1899. In 1920 he came to Chicago, where he became a popular figure to the public and in the underworld. He had a reputation as a murderer and was responsible for the deaths of over 1,000 people. Amazingly, the city of Chicago tolerated his bragging, boasting, and strutting, and the newspapers constantly quoted him on various issues. The general public seemed to be amused, if not a little envious, by his wealthy and corrupt underground activities. Capone bribed cops, judges, jurors, prosecutors, and newspaper editors. Capone spent money and luxury and high living not only on himself, but on associates and friends. This distinguished him publicly as a charitable sort of man. His famous soup kitchen was set up in the Depression days to feed the hungry. He would pass out large tips and gifts, all with the news media recording it for him. Even many politicians refused to believe that he was a really bad man. But he was so shrewd and evasive that police could find no evidence to convict him. Finally, the government, through the IRS, was able to find enough evidence to prosecute him. So I guess we can't say the IRS is all bad. Capone was a true representative of organized crime. On the surface he was charitable, friendly, humorous, and popular. He had his own press agent who referred to him almost daily in the newspapers. His oft-quoted wisecracks were popular with people. But behind his facade, his criminal activities brought him over $30 million a year. And that was in the 1920s, so we can only imagine what that would amount to now. He was taken to prison in 1932, spending some of his time in Alcatraz. After 7 years he was released because of bad health. He had contracted a venereal disease which caused his death in 1947. But his crime racket continued, and other competing gangs also grew in numbers and power. John Gotti. Another infamous crime leader was John Gotti. This most notorious mobster since Capone, known as Teflon Don, was the top guy of New York's Gambino crime family, which had left behind a long trail of corpses. He was glamorized as untouchable, and time after time he was set free from justice. He was popularized as a hardworking plumbing salesman and a family man who lived on modest means. But behind this facade was a much different individual. There are no elections in criminal gangs. Gotti had become boss of the Gambino family with the murder of his predecessor, Paul Castellano. Selections were made by ballot of the bullet. They were despotic tyrants who seized power by violence, mostly by murder. Those outside of the family had no rights at all. They were fair game to rob, cheat, torture, and kill. Thou shalt not kill was a cornerstone in the Judeo-Christian law, but it was reversed for the Gambino family. The government prosecutors had told them that the Gambino family, now headed by John Gotti, was the richest and most powerful organized crime family in the United States, that it engaged, on a large scale, in such diverse criminal operations as airport cargo hijacking, labor racketeering, extortion, drug trafficking, loan sharking, bookmaking, illegal restraint of trade, pornography distribution, counterfeiting, car theft, and murder, from which it took in hundreds of millions of dollars a year. They told the jurors that the Gambinos had a virtual stranglehold on New York's concrete industry, the city's garment district, trucking industry, and the private garbage carting industry. That because of these strangleholds, the Gambinos extracted a mob tax on every drop of concrete poured in the city, and on every garment manufactured in the city, and on every load of garbage picked up and dumped by private garbage carters in the city. Furthermore, the Gambinos controlled the entire Brooklyn waterfront. No ship could load or unload in Brooklyn without paying off the Gambinos. The Mafia Dynasty, John Davis, page 8. They had connections in New Jersey, Atlantic City, Connecticut, Philadelphia, Las Vegas, and Fort Lauderdale. Business continued and expanded overseas from the heroin factories in Sicily to selling stolen luxury cars in Kuwait. In 1992, John Gotti was convicted on RICO charges. When the verdict was announced, thousands of demonstrators came in by buses with placards saying "Free John Gotti." They rioted on cue, turning over police cars, smashing windows, and battling police. Talk about organized, they were working together with walkie-talkies and cellular phones. During Gotti's trial came two visitors from Hollywood, Mickey Rourke and Anthony Quinn. Anthony had played gangster roles on the screen, but he also had a personal acquaintance with many of the real ones. When the FBI released audio tapes of Gotti and his gang, the jury listened to conversations about whom they had murdered, whom they were going to murder, and why they had people murdered. The prosecuting attorney said, "Murder is the heart and soul of this enterprise." Gotti was convicted of conspiracy to murder Paul Castellano, and the actual murder of Paul Castellano, as well as the murder of Thomas Bellotti, conspiracy to murder Robert DiBernardo, and the actual murder of Robert DiBernardo. Judge Leo Glasser sentenced John Gotti to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. John Gotti Sr., his father, was a hard-working man who refused to believe that his son was a criminal. 4 days after Gotti's father heard the conviction of the court, he died of a heart attack. So secret and hidden were the activities of these crime lords that sometimes members of their own family never knew about them. What an alien and exotic enterprise the Gambino crime family had been in New York over the past 60 years. Here this huge, predacious growth, with roots deep in the social soil of rural 19th century southern Italy, had thrived to such an extent that it was able to impose an invisible tax on the people of the most powerful and influential city in the world. And what a succession of alien and exotic monarchs had managed to rule this murderous predator for 60 years, men whose lives and values were the antithesis of all that the founding fathers of the nation that harbored them had stood for and had embodied in the Constitution of the United States. The Mafia Dynasty, John Davis, page 483. And today, crime lords continue to gather more followers and expand their evil empires. They gain wealth with increasing billions of dollars every year, and they control with an unmatched power. Organized crime is now connected with every form of evil, as they try to buy happiness and possessions with their wicked money. But wealth is not measured in dollars, power does not come by tyranny, prestige is not found in corruption. True happiness is found in serving others, enjoying good health, and having a clear conscience. 1. 2. Corruption. Behold, I say unto you, wickedness never was happiness. Alma 41:10. What we used to call corruption has now taken on a new face. It has gained popularity and respectability, and many of the vices of yesteryear have now become acceptable behavior. At least the surface has been cleaned and polished, but the dead bones and skeletons remain inside. As Jesus explained, "For ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones, and of all uncleanness. Even so ye also outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within ye are full of hypocrisy and iniquity." Matt. 12:27-28. The bad name and bad appearance are no longer stigmas. No longer called saloons, rather they are beautiful casinos. No longer gambling dens and houses of ill fame, but now they are modern, expensive and plush hotels. Some gambling houses are now called resorts for families with something for everyone. Drinking, gambling, nudity, and sexual favors are being combined with the finest food, lavish swimming pools, exotic shopping malls, and playgrounds for the kids. People travel to these meccas as though it were a part of their spiritual pilgrimage. No more are there raids and arrests for making or selling liquor, as it is now served with respect, and the government itself is in the business of distributing it. Sin has not just become legal, but even a multi-billion-dollar business. But sin is not confined to casinos, pleasure palaces, and gambling parlors. It influences everything, like rain in a summer storm falling on the great and mighty, along with the small and weak. The police, the politician, and the preacher are all subject to be tempted and weakened by the desire for finance and the lust for flesh. And instead of improving, it is getting worse. Our educational system is also in reverse. Prayer and Bibles are no longer allowed in the classroom. Morality is not a part of any curriculum. Profanity prevails and neither God nor religion is mentioned. Classes on sex are taught and birth control devices are distributed by government agencies. The result is that many of the youth are not taught morals or religion. Statistics show the morality of American military to be appalling. In World War I there were more soldiers inflicted with venereal diseases than from all their wounds and injuries combined. In World War II 80% of all our soldiers had intercourse with women overseas. In 1950 there were over 50,000 arrests of gays in New York City, but by 1960 they had created a sexual revolution in the country with protests, parades and legal battles. Today some states protect them by law, in granting their civil rights. Today's average movie portrays foul language, violence, illicit sex, drugs, and murder as though they were part of our way of life, and they are. We have the greatest national and public debt of any nation. Our prisons are full, our hospitals are full, our mental institutions are full, and our courtrooms are full. Many cities have more babies aborted than are allowed to live. Our schools have become clearinghouses for drugs. Over half of all marriages end in divorce. We are indeed a sick society. The wickedness of today has been compared to that in the days of Noah. See Matt. 24:37. Those people were destroyed. Can we possibly believe we shall survive? The lessons of history show that when people live righteously, they are blessed, but when they are wicked, they are destroyed. Can we possibly think we are exceptions to the rule? The Lord warned, "Oh, this unbelieving and stiff-necked generation, mine anger is kindled against them." D&C 5:8. Hearken, O ye people who profess my name, saith the Lord your God, for behold, mine anger is kindled against the rebellious, and they shall know mine arm and mine indignation, in the day of visitation, and of wrath upon the nations. D&C 56:1. We stand at the door of God's destruction and don't seem to be aware of it, nor do we prepare for it. 1. 3. Conspiracy. I testify that wickedness is rapidly expanding in every segment of our society. CD&C 114-16, 8449-53. It is more highly organized, more cleverly disguised, and more powerfully promoted than ever before. Secret combinations lusting for power, gain and glory are flourishing. A secret combination that seeks to overthrow the freedom of all lands, nations, and countries is increasing its evil influence and control over America and the entire world. Press. Ezra Taft Benson, Conf. Rept. October 1988. The combination is here to stay. Individualism has gone, never to return. John D. Rockefeller I, 1839-1937. Of all the crimes and sins against society, none is as deadly as a secret conspiracy. The force of an army can be seen from afar off and be met with another army, but a secret force is unseen, unprepared for, and can create chaos without anyone knowing who the enemy is or where it is located. Conspiracy is not a new thing, it has existed since the days of Cain and Abel. Moroni said, "It hath been made known unto me, that they oaths and combinations are had among all people." Either 8:20, whenever the Lord establishes a righteous people, the devil will conspire to overthrow them. The Book of Mormon provides an abundance of references to the fruits of these secret combinations or conspiracies. 1. It is built up by the devil. Either 8:25. 2. He is the founder of all these things, yea, the founder of murder and works of darkness. 2 Nevi 26:22. 3. They bring great iniquity upon the people. 3 Nevi 7:9. 4. It is built up to get gain, Mormon 8:40, and power. Either 8:23. 5. It will corrupt the hearts of the people. Either 9:6. 6. It can even destroy the regulations of the government. 3 Nevi 7:6. 7. It can prove the overthrow, yea, almost the entire destruction of a nation. Helaman 2:13. Those who belong to these secret conspiracies present a very strong argument, as was the case with one of the leaders of the secret combination. It was join or die. Therefore, I write unto you, desiring that ye would yield up unto this my people, your cities, your lands, and your possessions, rather than that they should visit you with the sword, and that destruction should come upon you. Or in other words, yield yourselves up unto us, and unite with us, and become acquainted with our secret works, and become our brethren, that ye may be like unto us, not our slaves, but our brethren and partners of all our substance. 3 Nevi 3:6-7. The conspiracy movement uses three general methods to accomplish their purposes: 1. Persuasion, 2. Bribery or extortion, and 3. Threats of harm or death. The word secret keeps appearing, i.e., a secret combination, secret society or secret plan. But if it were so wonderful, why would it be a secret? At the trial of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, spies of the atomic bomb, Judge Irving R. Kaufman stated, "For two or more persons to conspire, confederate or combine together to commit, or cause to be committed a breach of the criminal law of the United States, is an offense of grave character which involves a plotting to subvert the law." It is almost always characterized by secrecy, rendering detection difficult and requiring much time for its discovery. Because of this, the statute is made a conspiracy to commit a crime a distinct offense from the crime itself. The New American Conspiracy, page 7. For a conspiracy to survive, it must be kept secret. A premature exposure of any conspiracy means disaster. Any thug, bank robber, thief, or mischief maker must keep his plot a secret, because discovery would ruin all their work. The premature exposure of Nazi or communist conspirators before they reached their goal would be the worst thing that could happen to them. For this reason, secrecy is the chief tool of every conspirator. The Book of Mormon tells us that this secret type of combination is most abominable and wicked above all, in the sight of God. Either 8:18, then it gives us a good example of the truth of this statement. "And behold, that great city Jechobbagath, which was inhabited by the people of King Jacob, have I caused to be burned with fire, because of their sins and their wickedness, which was above all the wickedness of the whole earth, because of their secret murders and combinations. For it was they that did destroy the peace of my people, and the government of the land. Therefore I did cause them to be burned, to destroy them from before my face, that the blood of the prophets and the saints should not come up unto me any more against them." 3 Nevi 9:9. Conspiracies have overthrown governments, destroyed religions, and killed righteous and innocent people. Conspiracies were the cause of the destructions of both the Jaredite and Nephite nations. Such a history should certainly be a warning to our generation. The Book of Mormon was not given to us merely as a study of archaeology, geography, anthropology, or just as another witness for Christ. It is a warning for us that, if we don't overthrow these secret conspiracies, the same destruction could befall our nation. Moroni writes, "And now I, Moroni, do not write the manner of their oaths and combinations, for it hath been made known unto me, that they are had among all people, and they are had among the Lamanites. And they have caused the destruction of this people, of whom I am now speaking, and also the destruction of the people of Nephi. And whatsoever nation shall uphold such secret combinations, to get power and gain, until they shall spread over the nation, behold, they shall be destroyed. For the Lord will not suffer that the blood of his saints, which shall be shed by them, shall always cry unto him from the ground for vengeance upon them, and yet he avenge them not. Wherefore, O ye Gentiles, it is wisdom in God, that these things should be shown unto you, that thereby ye may repent of your sins, and suffer not that these murderous combinations shall get above you, which are built up to get power and gain in the work, yea, even the work of destruction come upon you, yea, even the sword of the justice of the eternal God shall fall upon you, to your overthrow and destruction, if ye shall suffer these things to be. Wherefore, the Lord commandeth you, when ye shall see these things come among you, that ye shall awake to a sense of your awful situation, because of this secret combination which shall be among you. Ether 8:20-24. Sometimes more than one conspiracy leads to war against each other, or by joining together. The first objective is usually to acquire money. Today this involves converting and capturing the minds and pocketbooks of businessmen, bankers, politicians, and many others. Picture of Adam Weishaupt. The conspiracy with which we are dealing began over 200 years ago in Germany. The original ideology for our present project was born in the mind of Adam Weishaupt, a professor of canon law at the University of Ingolstadt, in Bavaria, Germany, in 1776. It was labeled as the Illuminati Order. A twist of fate 10 years later nearly destroyed the project when one of its emissaries was traveling with secret papers to Paris. Just 10 years into its existence, a sovereign act of God helped to expose the secret order. An Illuminati courier, Lanz, was traveling by horse from Frankfurt to Paris with important orders for his superiors. While traveling through the city of Regensburg, Germany, God struck him down with lightning and killed him. The Bavarian government, which had already been investigating the order, discovered the papers on his person and quickly raided Illuminati headquarters, confiscating the order's secret documents. The original Illuminate writings were then sent to all of Europe, warning them of the plot. By the time this Bavarian Illuminati order had been exposed, Illuminism had already spread into more than a dozen countries, including the United States. Those leaders who had not already fallen under Illuminati influence found its plan so extraordinary that they refused to take it seriously. Bloodlines of the Illuminati, Fritz Springmeier, page 13. Although Weishaupt was banished from Bavaria and the order was officially suppressed, the order simply went underground and emerged as a network of reading societies throughout Germany. The goal of this network was to monopolize the writing, publication, reviewing, and distribution of all literature as a means of controlling the minds of the readers. From the very beginning, the Illuminati was a secret society within a secret society, beginning in the Masonic Lodge Theodor of Munich, Germany, of which Weishaupt was a member. The Secret Side of History, Dies Honor, page 27. The project headquarters moved to Frankfurt, Germany, which was the playground of the Rothschild family. How interesting that the Illuminati was set up with 3 orders: 1. Kings, 2. Priests, and 3. Princes. And later they added other levels. It was their purpose to teach members how to destroy Christianity and take over governments and lead them to a one-world totality. The following is a copy of page 32 of the Illuminati papers found by the Bavarian government and published as the original Schriften der Illuminatensekt, Munich. It shows the 3 levels of their order, which continue down to 4 other lower orders. Chart and article. The Illuminists secretly teach their members the doctrines of Gnosticism, which has always been an attraction to the intellectuals. They believe in a yin-yang religion which represents a good-evil deity. Their God seeks the destruction of most men because they do not serve him, but as true believers are always willing to help him kill them. To kill off half the world means no more to these people than killing ants. They admit they believe in Satan, and they show it by persecuting and killing the Christians. They say their God promises them great wealth, and apparently he does, for they are among the richest of all people. Solomon's statement is proved true: the wicked prowl on every side. Psalm 12:8. As they are lurking everywhere, learning new ways of stealing from good people or else killing them. They are masters of starting wars, so they can profit from them. The French Revolution, 1789, has been recognized as a part of the conspiracy of the Order of the Illuminati, as Prof. John Robison of Edinburgh stated. An association has been formed for the express purpose of rooting out all the religious establishments and overturning all the existing governments of Europe. I have seen this association exerting itself zealously and systematically till it has become almost irresistible. And, lastly, I have seen that this association still exists, still works in secret. Proofs of a Conspiracy, 1798, page 7. Speaking to the House of Lords on March 2, 1770, William Pitt observed that there is something behind a throne greater than the king himself. The next century, another British statesman, Benjamin Disraeli, expressed a similar sentiment when he wrote in his novel Coningsby, or The New Generation, 1844. The world is governed by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes. Gary Benoit, editor of New American, page 1, September 16, 1998. In 1797, John Robison, an internationally renowned scientist and educator in Scotland, wrote one of the best exposes of the Illuminati, entitled Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All Religions and Governments. About the same time, 1798, another source of this information came out in France, called the Memoirs of Jacobism. It was written by Ab Beruel and was later published in America in Hartford, Connecticut, in 1799. And after even more thorough research into the subject, he published his findings in a 4-volume work. These 2 efforts created a domino effect for other investigations on the subject. Many ministers took up the subject of the Illuminati in their sermons. Rev. Jedediah Morse of Charlestown, Massachusetts, gave a well-publicized sermon which was widely published in newspapers. He also produced a letter from an Illuminati member in the Grand Lodge in France to a member in the Lodge of Wisdom in Portsmouth, Virginia, September 26, 1799. Rev. Morse subsequently received abusive letters and death threats which convinced him to preach sermons on other subjects. Others had made investigations into these allegations, such as the 3 individuals mentioned below. Winston Churchill wrote in a London newspaper in 1920, from the days of Spartacus Weishaupt to those of Karl Marx, etc. This worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstruction of society on the basis of arrested development, of envious malevolence and impossible equality, has been steadily growing. George Washington wrote to a minister, "It was not my intention to doubt that the doctrines of the Illuminati had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one is more fully satisfied of this fact than I am." President of Harvard University, in 1812, wrote, "There is sufficient evidence that a number of societies of the Illuminati have been established in this land. They are doubtless striving to secretly undermine all our ancient institutions, civil and sacred. These societies are clearly leagued with those of the same order in Europe. We live in an alarming period. The enemies of all orders are seeking our ruin. Should infidelity generally prevail, our independence would fall, of course. Our republican government would be annihilated." The above three references are taken from Bloodlines of the Illuminati, page 16. After these revelations by Robison and Beruel, the ideals and philosophy of a one-world government began spreading around Germany. Some of them were attached to the Weishaupt clan, but one of those who was not was Karl Marx, 1818 to 1883, an intellectual who studied in universities at Bonn, Trier, and Berlin. He was joined by another collaborator, Friedrich Engels, in writing and publishing works on their theories. Continuing their double task of opposing the utopians and awakening the proletariat to class consciousness, Marx and Engels wrote innumerable articles against the former and joined secret societies of workingmen, and for such organizations published his weekly newspaper. American People's Inc. 12-233. This was the joining of two secret societies. Marx was joined to the secret society of the financiers. He would provide the muscle for them, and they would provide the finance for him. This too would be a secret for a long time. Marx completed a work in 1847 called the Communist Manifesto and began formation of the Communist League. But the leaders were hunted down and imprisoned, resulting in its temporary dissolution. However, it was resurrected by the secret financiers in Germany, France, Belgium, Italy, and Spain under the name of the First International. Marx himself admitted that communism was handed down in the dark through the secret societies. Introduction to the Communist Manifesto, page 21, by Washington Square Press. A cardinal of the Catholic Church wrote extensively on this subject and said that the basis of Karl Marx's work was not his own but rather of secret political societies, which from 1789 to this day have been perfecting their formation, and have drawn closer together in mutual alliance and cooperation. In 1848 they were sufficiently powerful to threaten almost every capital in Europe by a simultaneous rising. Characteristics from the writings of Cardinal Manning, H. E. Manning, page 46. On March 19, 1902, Pope Leo XIII, in an apostolic letter, wrote, including almost every nation in its immense grasp, communism unites itself with other sects, of which it is the real inspiration and the hidden motive power. It first attracts, and then retains its associates by the bait of worldly advantage which it secures for them. It bends governments to its will, sometimes by promises, sometimes by threats. It has found its way into every class of society, and forms an invisible and irresponsible power, an independent government, as it were within the body corporate of the lawful state. Proofs of a Conspiracy, 1798, John Robison, page 7. Communism has been recognized as only a tool in the hands of these conspirators. Thinking that communism is dead as a ruse and puts the misinformed at ease and vulnerable. The realization that Bolshevism is only one phase of the world conspiracy, as Webster called it, makes it easier to understand how these secret forces continue to sustain and strengthen themselves outside and along with the growth of this new tentacle of their conspiracy after its rise to a position of prominence and power. This is a fact that has been testified to by, among others, Pope Pius XI, who declared in 1937 that communism has behind it occult forces which for a long time have been working for the overthrow of the Christian social order. Conspiracy Against God and Man, Rev. Clarence Kelly, page 215. Communism is only the tip of the iceberg. The unseen part is much larger and more dangerous. Advocating the death of communism is one of the greatest feats of showmanship ever performed on stage or under Hollywood lights. It was a miracle believed by more people than any miracle of the Bible. It was a feat that surpassed anything devised by Houdini. It was designed by minds of the highest intellectualism and took the longest time to perfect. It was beyond any believable lie ever perpetuated through the hypnotic oratory of Hitler's propaganda minister, Herr Goebbels. Let's review what has happened. Communism grew rapidly for over 100 years. It had an influencer position in nearly every nation. It had developed the greatest military power on earth and enlisted the greatest number of armed men in its service. It was almost in a position to crush the rest of the world, but suddenly 150 people marched for 3 days around Lenin Square in Moscow. No shots were fired, no one died, no one went to jail. But the newspapers, television and radio media declared communism was dead. Why hadn't somebody thought of that before? We should hire those 150 people to march around the White House and get rid of King Clinton and his clan. The truth behind the lie was well spoken by Russia's mighty weightlifter at a recent Olympic Games. A reporter asked him, "We understand you didn't get to come to the last Olympic Games because you were so outspoken against communism. What do you think about it now that communism is dead?" He replied, "I wouldn't be so sure if I were you. The same people still have the same jobs. The label on the bottle has been changed, but the contents remain the same. Who, then, is really behind this modern conspiracy?" Many, including the communists themselves, have asked this question. Cleon Skousen once interviewed the renowned communist Bella Dodd after her break with the Communist Party, and she admitted that this was also a question that had bothered her as well. Who is trying to take over the world? I think the communist conspiracy is merely a branch of a much bigger conspiracy. The above statement was made to this reviewer several years ago by Dr. Bella Dodd, a former member of the National Committee of the U.S. Communist Party. Perhaps this is an appropriate introduction to a review of Dr. Carol Quigley's book, Tragedy and Hope. Dr. Dodd said she first became aware of some mysterious super-leadership right after World War II, when the U.S. Communist Party had difficulty getting instructions from Moscow on several vital matters requiring immediate attention. The American communist hierarchy was told that any time they had an emergency of this kind they should contact any one of 3 designated persons at the Waldorf Towers. Dr. Dodd noted that whenever the party obtained instructions from any of these 3 men, Moscow always ratified them. What puzzled Dr. Dodd was the fact that not one of these 3 contacts was a Russian. Nor were any of them communists. In fact, all 3 were extremely wealthy American capitalists. Dr. Dodd said, "I would certainly like to find out who is really running things." The Naked Capitalist, Skousen, page 1. It is strange that Karl Marx spoke harshly against the capitalists, yet we see that the very super-rich are the main contributors to these secret societies. We must remember that power creates desire for more power, and that riches whet the appetite for more riches. The sound of world power and world riches was an attractive lure for all conspirators. The Bilderberg Group is the most powerful of the surviving descendants of the Round Table, a secret society founded in 1877 by Cecil Rhodes, who was supported by Lord Rothschild and Alfred Beit of De Beers, the Diamond King. All of these records are reported by Professor Carol Quigley, 1910 to 1977, who exposed the conspiracy in his voluminous 1966 book, Tragedy and Hope. Quigley himself was a part of the conspiratorial machinery, so at first it was thought that he had broken with the party and was making an expose of the whole rotten mess. But no, he was merely explaining what they had done, what they were doing, and what they would do, supplemented with the attitude, "We are so great and powerful, there is nothing you can do about it." Quigley's motive was that the men behind the scenes should no longer remain there, but rather come forth before the public and take the glory for their world federation. The world apparatus is controlled by collaboration of 2 councils or houses, the Rothschilds and Rockefellers. The European nations remain under the domain of the Rothschilds, while the others are dominated by the Rockefellers. In the American sector, the affiliated committees of this conglomerate are the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Council of the Americas, and the Federal Reserve. The Bilderberg operation is very similar, but with less secrecy. As in every conspiracy, confidential information usually leaks out. Sometimes even the rulers themselves will be brazen enough to comment on their projects or progress. Here are a few of the statements and facts that have been published in the New American Special Edition entitled Conspiracy for Global Control, September 16, 1986, a secret combination. The governments of the present day have to deal not merely with other governments, with emperors, kings and ministers, but also with the secret societies which have everywhere their unscrupulous agents and can at the last moment upset all the government's plans. British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, 1876. The real rulers in Washington are invisible and exercise power from behind the scenes. Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter. What is important is to dwell upon the increasing evidence of the existence of a secret conspiracy throughout the world for the destruction of organized government and the letting loose of evil. Anybody who will for a moment turn to the outpourings of Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati which Weishaupt founded may satisfy himself of that. Christian Science Monitor editorial, June 19, 1920. Control of commerce. Some of the biggest men in the U.S., in the field of commerce and manufacturing, are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. Woodrow Wilson, 1913. Control of the news media. In March 1915, the J.P. Morgan interests, the steel, shipbuilding, and powder interests, and their subsidiary organizations, got together 12 men high up in the newspaper world and employed them to select the most influential newspapers in the United States, and sufficient number of them to control generally the policy of the daily press. They found it was only necessary to purchase the control of 25 of the greatest papers. An agreement was reached. The policy of the papers was bought, to be paid for by the month. An editor was furnished for each paper to properly supervise and edit information regarding the questions of preparedness, militarism, financial policies, and other things of national and international nature considered vital to the interests of the purchasers. Congressman Oscar Callaway, 1917. Control of the money system. This act, the Federal Reserve Act, establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this act, the invisible government by the money power, proven to exist by the money trust investigation, will be legalized. The money power overawes the legislative and executive forces of the nation and of the states. Congressman Charles Lindbergh, 1913. Control over Christian religions. Our final end is that of Voltaire and of the French Revolution, the destruction forever of Catholicism, and even of the Christian idea which, if left standing on the ruins of Rome, would be the resuscitation of Christianity later on. The work which we have undertaken is not the work of a day, nor of a month, nor of a year. It may last many years, a century perhaps, but in our ranks the soldier dies, and the fight continues. Permanent instructions of the Alta Vendita, successor to the Illuminati, as the Supreme Directorate of the Revolutionary Secret Societies. Control of the government. The real menace of our republic is this invisible government which like a giant octopus sprawls its slimy length over city, state and nation. Like the octopus of real life, it operates under cover of a self-created screen. At the head of this octopus are the Rockefeller Standard Oil interests and a small group of powerful banking houses generally referred to as international bankers. The little coterie of powerful international bankers virtually run the United States government for their own selfish purposes. They practically control both political parties. N.Y. Mayor, John F. Hylan, 1922. The real truth of the matter is, as you and I know, that a financial element in the large centers has owned the government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson. Franklin D. Roosevelt, 1933. Control and planning of wars. The government of the Western nations, whether monarchical or republican, had passed into the invisible hands of a plutocracy, international in power and grasp. It was, I venture to suggest, this semi-occult power which pushed the mass of the American people into the cauldron of World War I. British military historian Major General J.F.C. Fuller, 1941. Control of the world. Today the path to total dictatorship in the United States can be laid by strictly legal means, unseen and unheard by the Congress, the President, or the people. Outwardly we have a constitutional government. We have operating within our government and political system another body representing another form of government, a bureaucratic elite which believes our constitution is outmoded and is sure that it is the winning side. Senator William Jenner, 1954. In my view, the Trilateral Commission represents a skillful, coordinated effort to seize control and consolidate the four centers of power: political, monetary, intellectual, and ecclesiastical. What the Trilaterals truly intend is the creation of a worldwide economic power superior to the political governments of the nation-states involved. As managers and creators of the system they will rule the future. Senator Barry Goldwater, 1979. A force against all that is good. There exists a conspiracy in favor of despotism against liberty, of incapacity against talent, of vice against virtue, of ignorance against enlightenment. This society aims at governing the world. Its object is universal domination. This plan may seem extraordinary, incredible, yes, but not chimerical. No such calamity has ever yet afflicted the world. Marquis de Lachey, a repentant Illuminist, warning France in 1789. This international conspiracy is unlike any other conspiracy. It is so immense and complex that all its members do not know each other, nor do some even have any connection with others. The regular conspiracy is conducted with general meetings, records, and a clear structure within which all knowingly work together. But this network is so large and obscure, and the manner of coordination is so remote, that investigations can turn up only small parts and pieces of their work. Now we come to the final phase of accomplishments of the conspirators. The following are just 12 of the most prominent and dangerous organizations and secret combinations in America that Moroni warned about. Suffer not that these murderous combinations shall get above you, which are built up to get power and gain. Either 823. 1. The Social Security System. 2. The Internal Revenue Service. 3. The Federal Reserve System. 4. Foreign aid and national debt. 5. Press. William Jefferson Clinton. 6. Unlawful executive orders. 7. The oath of office. 8. Gun control. 9. Communism. 10. United Nations. 11. The New World Order. 12. The New Age Movement. These will be discussed in more detail on the following pages. 1. The Social Security System. Social Security is a part of socialism. The propaganda machine of the conspirators promotes socialism. Hitler, the Nazi Socialist Party, Karl Marx, the Communist Socialist Party, and all their affiliates such as Mao Zedong have promoted socialism. Exactly what does the word mean? Socialism, a political theory or social system based on collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods. Webster's New Encyclopedic Dictionary, page 977. Creeping socialism, anything considered as a gradual or piecemeal encroachment upon the system of private property and free enterprise through state action. New Internal Dic. Vol. 21191. This creeping socialism is what describes our social security system. Most Americans would never intentionally vote for socialism because they know it doesn't work. They would lose their free agency. Therefore, the conspirators planned to give it to them gradually and in small doses until they became completely infected by it. One of the plans would be called the Social Security System. During the Great Depression, it was easy to convince people that government programs and agencies were there to help people, both then and in their old age. The very term Social Security sounded attractive, and everyone looked upon it as a great benefit from the government. Wonderful advantages to this program were widely publicized, such as 1. It was an insurance program that would be a great help in time of disaster or peril. 2. It was a retirement program. 3. It would provide funeral benefits to everyone at their death. The Social Security Act was established under the provisions of Title VII on August 14, 1935. It was brought into existence under the guise of benefits for old age assistance and economic security as old age and survivors insurance. It began as a very small, insignificant deduction from individual paychecks. However, as time went on, the amount of the deduction gradually increased until it is now, in some cases, equal to or more than the amount deducted for federal or state income taxes. And, of course, now it is too late to get rid of it. For many years the little Social Security card that everyone carried was printed as follows. Note that it states that this card was not to be used for identification purposes. As to the matter of its being an insurance, Michael Kelly, Assistant District Director of the IRS, answered a letter to Jerry Watley in Dukin, Oklahoma, January 4, 1978, and wrote, "In your letter you ask if Social Security is insurance, and if Form 4029 applies to the tax imposed by Sections 1301 and 3101 of the IRC. Social Security is not an insurance within the meaning of the term insurance. If a person is employed, unemployed, or retired, he is at least indirectly paying for Social Security. Every time someone in the U.S. purchases a product or service, that person is paying for Social Security, as that tax is hidden in the price. Also hidden in this system is the amount to be paid to the bureaucrats who handle the system. Some think that all the money put into social security system is earning money. Nothing could be further from the truth, even though that was the original idea. The government is spending the money as fast as it comes in, and this is threatening the existence of the whole social security system. The bureaucrats must constantly raise this tax and reduce the benefits in order to keep the SS program afloat. It keeps self-destructing on the same principle that a snake keeps eating his own tail. An individual's social security number is required in every phase of employment, identification and control. It is a requirement in order to obtain a driver's license, to enroll in school, to enter as a patient in a hospital, to get a job, and to open a bank account. This social security card has become a national ID card, even though the government said it would not be used for that purpose. We are required to pay income taxes, but for our payment to be accepted, we have to provide our social security number on the tax forms. So if you do not have an SS number, you can't pay your taxes, and if you do not pay your taxes, you are in big trouble. This government identification number is fed into an international database, where personal names are less important than this number. The following letter came from Penny Payton of the Department of Health and Human Services, January 10, 1990, and was addressed to Jerome Schiffen, Box 149, Hudson, South Dakota 57034. The Internal Revenue Service uses Social Security numbers as taxpayer identification numbers. PL 87-397 was passed on October 5, 1961, requiring each taxpayer to furnish an identifying number for tax reporting purposes. Because of this, employers must have the social security numbers of their workers to legally report their earnings. They could not continue to employ an individual for whom they could not legally report earnings. A bank or lending institution is not governed by social security rules, but I doubt very much if they would refuse a loan, simply because the applicant had no social security number. However, a person with no social security number would have no taxable income, and I am sure this fact would have a bearing on their decision. An inheritance large enough to be taxable would require the recipient to get a social security number for IRS purposes. On March 13, 1991, Mr. Arno Liebelt wrote a letter to the Department of Health and Human Services with a request to revoke his social security number. On April 10, 1991, a Mr. Stephen Siff, a SSA privacy officer, responded, "This is in response to your notice, in which you stated that you wish to revoke your signature on your application for a social security number. We regret that we cannot honor your request. Once a person has received a social security number, it will permanently remain on government records, and they will always refer to it." On June 25, 1986, Rodney Rickman wrote a letter to the Commissioner of Social Security, concerned that people are required to have an SS number before they can be employed. Mr. Dorcas Hardy, Commissioner of Social Security, answered on July 16, "The Internal Revenue Code and applicable regulations require an individual to get and use a social security number on tax documents and furnish that number to any other person or institution, such as an employer or a bank, that is required to furnish to the Internal Revenue Service information about payments to the individual. There are penalties for failure to do so." To recap the information just discussed, consider the following 10 points. 1. Social Security was not meant to be used for identification purposes, but it is. 2. It was promised that it would function as an insurance, but it doesn't. 3. U.S. citizens are forced to have a social security number in order to work for any company. 4. Businesses are forced to refuse hiring anyone who does not have a SS number. 5. One can't drive legally on the public highways without this number. 6. Social security deposits are a bad investment. If the money deducted for SS would have been invested in a good bond or investment company, the amount would have quadrupled. 7. The SS monthly payments do not provide enough for retirement, as promised. 8. Loans, investments, and inheritances are regulated by social security numbers. 9. Money earned without being reported through the social security system is considered illegal money. 10. Laws have now been passed that babies are to be given social security numbers. Social Security is a socialist system. Most people do not want to live under socialism, but if we vote and participate in these innocent programs, they gradually grow to become nationwide systems that will break down the nation. Compulsory socialist orders have never been successful, nor will they ever be. In and of itself, the government has no rights, only those the people give it. However, the people cannot give a right to the government that they themselves do not have. If individuals do not have the right to steal, they cannot give that right to the government. A violation of your rights and the taking of your values without permission is a criminal act, whether it be by an individual, a group, a religion, or a government. An unconstitutional law is not a law. It confers no right, it imposes no duties, it affords no protection, it creates no offices, it is in legal contemplation as inoperative as though it had never been passed. Norton vs. Shelby County, 118 U.S., page 442. The Ponzi scheme. In going back through history, it can be detected that the Social Security system is based on a financial principle discovered by a man named Ponzi, and we have all heard of his schemes in a more or less negative context. During the Depression days of the 1930s, a fellow by the name of Ponzi borrowed some money from a friend, telling him he would pay it back with very good interest. In a few weeks he came back to return the money with a huge amount of interest. The friend said he didn't have to pay so much, but Ponzi said he found an investment program that was a fabulous moneymaker. His friend told him to put the money back into the fund for himself, which Ponzi agreed to do. A month later Ponzi returned with a huge interest payment which so excited his friend that he invested it again with much more added to it. He also convinced his friends to get in on the good fortune, and they too were so happy with the return that they invested more and got their friends to invest. Ponzi nearly had a stampede coming to his door with money to invest. Whenever anyone wanted their money back, just to see if they could, Ponzi always met them with a smile and all their money. No one knew what the investment was because Ponzi wouldn't tell them. By now it seemed the whole city was investing in it. Ponzi moved to a fine office and staffed it with secretaries and bookkeepers. Finally the government investigated. It took a long time, but they finally figured it out. Ponzi would take in a lot of money, and if someone wanted their money back, he could pay them from the other funds coming in. The only possible disaster to the scheme was if everyone wanted their money back at the same time, it would be impossible to pay them. The Ponzi fraud was so profitable that many other schemers have tried the same program with slight variations. What is the most astounding thing about it is that the US government put Ponzi in prison for his scheme, and then they did the same thing and called it Social Security. Charles Ponzi was born in Italy in 1882. He always wanted to get rich quick and easily, so he started stealing things, but every time he stole something, he would get caught. In 1903 he emigrated to America, where he dreamed of all the wealth he might get. In 1907 he tried working at a bank, but he got caught embezzling and forging checks. He went to prison for 3 years. After that he got caught smuggling Italians into the country and spent another 2 years in prison. Then he got a job in a post office where he saw some little postal reply coupons and figured how to make money using them in a new scheme. He would get investors to give him money and they could double it in 3 months. 3 months later he would give them their money back, plus all the interest that was promised. Most of them wanted to do it again, and then again. Word-of-mouth advertising spread like wildfire all over Boston, and in a short time he was known all along the eastern seaboard. He had to establish an office with clerks, bookkeepers and salesmen, and he called his company the Securities Exchange Company. When people wanted their money, he gave it to them with a smile, and they would turn around and reinvest it. 1/4 of the Boston police were investing in it. Some people mortgaged homes. Some borrowed money to put in. Even his own wife invested $800. He did so well that in 3 months he was able to donate $100,000 to an orphanage. He once worked for a shipping firm where one of the supervisors fired him, so he bought the whole shipping firm just so he could retaliate and fire the supervisor. At one point Ponzi was taking in $250,000 a day, which was a lot of money in the early 1920s, and he took in over $10 million in 8 months. It was finally calculated that he took in about $250 billion by today's standards. Finally an investigative reporter and some auditors came to look at his books. The bubble broke, and Ponzi was arrested for inventing the first pyramid scheme. He was the most famous of all schemers. After serving his time in prison, he was deported to Italy where he died. At his death he was found with only $100 to his name, which was just about enough to bury him. It has been said that, if Ponzi could see all the pyramid schemes around the world today that are using his technique, he would be proud. Probably the worst Ponzi scheme of all is our own US Social Security system. There are no reserves. If everyone demanded their money at the same time, payment would be impossible. No one could describe the Social Security system better than Boyd Crabtree, who wrote in his book, "If prizes were ever given for phony, blatant, and misleading advertising, the Social Security Administration would take first place. No private American insurance company, or indeed any free enterprise business at all, could get away with false statements and ridiculous promises which are made by the Social Security Administration." How to Drop Out of Social Insecurity, Boyd Crabtree, page 13. 2. The Internal Revenue Service. The term tax should have been a four-letter word. At least that is the connotation that most people have about a tax. But in actuality, there is nothing wrong with a tax if it is collected and disbursed in the method that the law intended. Taxes may be a very beneficial system, but unfortunately they are seldom confined to the purpose for which they were established. In simple terms, taxation is money taken by the government to support various programs, including itself. A dictionary definition is a compulsory payment, usually a percentage, levied on income, property value, sales price, etc., for the support of a government. Webster's New World Dictionary, 2nd College ed. 1982. The who and how of taxes is the critical issue. The proper mode was given by Jesus to Peter, and when they were come to Capernaum, they that received tribute money came to Peter, and said, "Doth not your master pay tribute?" He saith, "Yes." And when he was come into the house, Jesus prevented him, saying, "What thinkest thou, Simon, of whom do the kings of the earth take customer tribute, of their own children, or of strangers?" Peter saith unto him, "Of strangers." Jesus saith unto him, "Then are the children free." Matt. 17:24-26. Thus taxation should apply to captives, foreigners and visitors. This was a law of taxation that was used in ancient Israel and in most other nations as well. Tax, taxing, tax or tribute in the form of captives, slaves, money, produce which a conquering nation demanded from another, duty collected on imported goods, customs tax, toll or road tax, ... Not tribute but forced labor of captive people, as Israel did with the conquered cities of Canaan, one of the earliest forms of taxation. Dute. 2011, Zondervan's Bible Inc. 5603. Tax, tribute. Tribute is a contribution, either compulsory or voluntary, given by persons, nations, or kings who have been subjugated by another power in recognition either of their subservience or of a king's position or outstanding qualities. Taxation, in the sense of a compulsory contribution levied on wealth by a civil or religious authority for public purposes, is a later development. In each case the payments or contributions may be made in precious metals, goods, animals, forced labor, or persons. Internal Bible Inc. 4739. In other words, when a nation declared war on Israel and lost, they would no longer be an independent nation, and the people would pay tribute or taxation to Israel in property or labor. If those laws had been in effect when Germany and Japan lost the war, they would no longer be independent nations, but rather possessions or territories of the victors. The defeated people would pay all the taxation. But today the U.S. government taxes its own citizens and gives the money to other nations. What a reversal of the ancient law of taxation. In effect, American citizens are a conquered people paying taxes to foreign countries. America's first tax revolt took place in 1632. The people of Watertown, Massachusetts, were outraged when the directors of the Massachusetts Bay Company levied funds for the fortification of Cambridge. The revolt ended when the settlers agreed to the popular election of selected men who then calculated the tax. This was according to their constitution. Thus, Americans accepted taxation, provided it was assessed by a representation of their choice, not by some king, treasonous president, or international banker. President Andrew Jackson, who incurred the undying enmity of the international bankers by his battle against their central bank, the Second Bank of the United States, was so averse to taxation that in 1836, he reduced internal tax receipts to less than $500. In his farewell address, President Jackson said, "Congress has no right under the Constitution to take money from the people unless it is required to execute some one of the specific powers entrusted to the government. And if there is more than is necessary for such purposes, it is an abuse of the power of taxation and unjust and oppressive." William Gladstone observed that "I believe an income tax does more than any other tax to corrupt the people." The Rape of Justice, Eustace Mullins, page 461. In August of 1894 a law was proposed for an income tax on all incomes above $4,000, about $60,000 of today's dollars. It was declared to be unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in Pollock v. Farmers Loan and Trust. The court ruled that 1. Tax on real estate was an indirect tax, 2. Tax on income from real estate was an indirect tax, and 3. Tax on earnings was also an indirect tax. Therefore, the whole act was unconstitutional and declared void. However, this did not discourage the bankers. They again tried it in 1913 in the form of the 16th Amendment to the Constitution. It barely passed, under a very devious and unconstitutional method. However, the amendment was never ratified by most states. Essentially then, the income tax is not a legal amendment and therefore operates fraudulently. It is not valid according to the U.S. Constitution. One of the most forceful warnings against the IRS and the 16th Amendment came from Richard E. Byrd, Speaker of the House of Delegates. The 16th Amendment means that the state must now give up a legitimate and long-established source of revenue and yield it to the federal government. It means that the state actually invited the federal government to invade its territory, to oust its jurisdiction, and to establish federal dominion within the innermost citadel of reserved rights of the Commonwealth. This amendment will do what even the 14th and 15th Amendments could not do. It will extend the federal power so as to reach the citizens in the ordinary business of life. A hand from Washington will be stretched out and placed upon every man's business. The eye of a federal inspector will be in every man's counting house. The law will of necessity have inquisitorial features. It will provide penalties. It will create a complicated machinery. Under it, businessmen will be hauled into courts distant from their homes. Heavy fines imposed by distant and unfamiliar tribunals will constantly menace the taxpayer. An army of federal inspectors, spies and detectives will descend upon the state. They will compel men of business to show their books and disclose the secrets of their affairs. They will dictate forms of bookkeeping. They will require statements and affidavits. On the one hand, the inspector can blackmail the taxpayer, and on the other, he can profit by selling his secret to his competitor. Whoever desires liberty should understand that every man who puts money into the hands of a government so-called puts into its hands a sword which will be used against himself to extort more money from him. Quoted in The Rape of Justice, E. Mullins, pages 451-52. However, telling the truth and exposing unlawful activities of the IRS is very dangerous. Eustace Mullins also described what happened to Congressman George Hansen of Idaho, who wrote and spoke against IRS abuses. The most famous victim of such abuse was Congressman George Hansen of Idaho. IRS tactics not only defeated him for re-election, but later sent him to prison on flimsy charges of ethics violations. It was proved that he had followed House guidelines in filling out the new forms, but he was convicted and imprisoned in a political vendetta. When his wife announced that she would run for his congressional seat, she was immediately threatened by IRS agents. They informed her that if she would not turn over lists of her campaign contributors, she too would be sent to prison. Her campaign supporters then came under fire from the IRS, and she was forced to abandon her race for Congress. The Rape of Justice, Mullins, page 468. However, if any citizen voices a protest or complaint about his treatment by the IRS, he is placed on a special blacklist. He is classified as a tax protester and considered to be breaking the law. But, in reality, it is just the opposite. Anyone who knows of illegal, unconstitutional and unlawful activities of the IRS or its agents should report them to the proper authorities. This is the law. If a person fails to file or report information about a crime known to him, then he is guilty of misprision. Defined as failure in the duty of a citizen to endeavor to prevent the commission of a crime, or, having knowledge of its commission, to reveal it to the proper authorities. Black's Law Dictionary, 2nd ed. Page 784. Many constitutionalists, conservatives, and patriots have discovered that the IRS system is founded on a fraud, has become corrupted in its activities, and in reality, is operating against the law. This means it is an unlawful organization and a criminal activity. So anyone who knows this and does not report it to the proper authorities is also guilty of a crime. During the Second World War, Congress passed a temporary wartime measure, the Current Tax Payment Act of 1943, which was known as the withholding tax. This was a program to take taxes from the source of a person's pay before he received it, an illegal garnishee of wages. However, it has been over 50 years since the war ended, and this program is still in effect. Not only does the employer have no authority to collect taxes, but he collects taxes as a condition of keeping your employment. Both acts are illegal. This whole system of taxation is called the progressive or graduating tax, which Marx and Lenin devised. They would never have believed that their program for a graduated income tax would turn out to be their greatest benefit from a nation they hated. From the inception of the income tax, U.S. taxpayers' funds have provided a steady stream of money, material and aid to foreign countries. Our taxes have supported communism since the days of Franklin D. Roosevelt. During World War II we saved communist Russia. Then amazingly during their Cold War against us, we still kept sending them everything they wanted. The more they threatened us, the more we helped them. Sending tax money for the benefit of a foreign power is unconstitutional, but we have continued anyway. What better way to conquer a people than to make them poor? An impoverished nation is easy to subdue and control because they have neither the will nor the means of resistance. The way to get a nation to spend its money is to spend it for them by taking over the high positions of finance and power in their government. The early colonial Americans started a war because the British put a tax on tea. Now we can't escape taxation of our own making. Maybe we would have been better off by letting the British have their tea tax. Today in America we are burdened with taxes on income, purchases, property, services, tips, etc. Indeed, there is virtually nothing that is not taxed. The average taxation for Americans is over 50% because of the hidden taxes in addition to the obvious ones. In many cases there are taxes on top of taxes. For instance, if you buy a vehicle tire for $100, there is a state sales tax of over $6, then a federal tax on top of the combined price of the tire and the state tax. As soon as cellular phones became available, the tax boys figured out 7 taxes that could be placed on them. 2 federal, 3 state, and 2 city. 2 of the taxes were called universal taxes, whatever that was. Can you imagine instigating 7 taxes for use of the airwaves? We can't even die without the tax program following us. There is a coffin tax, funeral tax, and a tax on our final burial plot. Let's take a look at those who benefit from the income tax. It's the bankers and big businessmen, the very ones who initiated this tax to begin with, and who have been able to use loopholes to get around paying it themselves. For example, Paul Getty was reported to have earned $70 million in personal income in 1 year, and yet he paid only $6,000 income tax. Ferdinand Lundberg in his book The Rich and the Super Rich described a man who had $19 million and paid less income tax than his chauffeur. Mrs. Delphine Dodge invested her $56 million and received an annual income of $2 million and was not even required to file a 1040 form. If she had earned $600 monthly as a washerwoman, she could have been sent to prison for failure to pay taxes on that income. In 1969, David Rockefeller, chairman of the Chase Manhattan Bank, stated in testimony before the House Ways and Means Committee that although he did not owe any income tax, he nevertheless, out of the kindness of his heart, sent a small check each year to the IRS. The 50 largest corporations in America do not have to pay any income tax. The IRS code has provisions which, on the one hand, are designed to favor some individuals and corporations, while on the other hand, they are designed to destroy honest and hard-working individuals of the middle class. Many questions regarding the income tax have never been satisfactorily answered by the IRS. 1. Who is actually required to file and pay an income tax? 2. What is the lawful medium of exchange to pay the tax? 3. Is the IRS lawfully allowed to collect taxes from American citizens for the benefit of foreign governments? 4. Since it is a voluntary tax, why is it forced upon American citizens? New IRS guidelines have declared that every child over age 5 must have a social security number. In fact, most children are now issued a social security number when their parents register them for their birth certificates. In 1951, Congressman E. Cox introduced a resolution in the House asking for a committee to conduct a thorough investigation of tax-exempt foundations. He said that some of these foundations were spreading false propaganda, radicalism, and supporting communism. He named, for example, the Rockefeller Foundation, whose funds have been used to finance individuals and organizations whose business it has been to get communism into the private and public schools of the country, to talk down America, and to play up Russia. Congressional Record, August 1, 1951. However, the proposal was whitewashed and changed, and Cox was accused of prejudice, racism and anti-Semitism. It proved that many tax-exempt foundations have enough power in the White House, in Congress, and with the media, that they are beyond the reach of a congressional investigating committee. Former FBI agent Dan Smoot declared, "The federal income tax system suckles the forces which are destroying our free and independent republic. Abolish the system, and the sucklings will die of starvation." If the federal government had not collected 1 penny in tax on personal incomes, the government would still have more tax revenue from other sources than our most extravagant peacetime spending year. Every American who knows that can readily understand the possibility and the necessity of repealing the federal tax on personal incomes. In some ways, the policies of our invisible government have taken us beyond the point of no return. The invisible government, Dan Smoot, page 180. Along with the unfair tax on personal income is the unjust tax on personal property. The main objective of socialists is to keep adding more taxes upon the people until there is complete taxation on everything. That, of course, is socialism. When they finally succeeded in establishing the tax on personal property, they had achieved one of their greatest victories. Few citizens remembered that an inalienable right of citizenship is the right to own property. It is the great distinction between our republic and the Marxist nations, which forbid the ownership of private property. Property stems from the word proper, deriving from the Latin proprius, one's own, belong to oneself, and from the French verb proprier, to have in possession. Thus it is right to own property. One is not a proper citizen unless one owns property. The founding fathers required property ownership as a requisite to voting. Those who were not proper, who owned nothing, could not be expected to vote in a responsible manner. The Rape of Justice, Mullins, page 460. Placing a tax on property was a controlling step in taking private property away from individuals. Taxation on property could be increased until the people could not afford to buy or keep the property. Not only this, but if people did not pay the tax on their property, the government would confiscate it. This tax changes the whole position of ownership of property. If the government can take away your property because of failure to pay taxes, it really means that the government actually has ownership, and your property tax is merely a lease payment. Who, then, really owns America, its people and its land? Certainly not the citizens, so it must be our socialist government. 3. The Federal Reserve System. After the IRS collects billions of dollars from the American people in taxes, where does that money go? Directly to the United States government? No, it goes to an organization called the Federal Reserve Bank. Even though federal sounds like it pertains to government, it is no more government than the Federal Express or the Federal Ammunition Company. Consider the following dictionary definitions. Federal Reserve System: a centralized banking system in the U.S. under a board of governors, formerly called the Federal Reserve Board, with supervisory powers over 12 Federal Reserve banks, each a central bank for its district, and about 6,000 member banks. It was established in 1913 to develop a currency which would fluctuate with business demands and to regulate the member banks of each district. Webster's New World, Dick. 1982. Federal Reserve System: a banking system created by the Federal Reserve Act 10,413 and controlled by a Federal Reserve Board of 8 members, established to provide an elastic currency and to concentrate the national banking resources in a system of 12 Federal Reserve banks. The Federal Reserve cities are Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Richmond, Atlanta, Chicago, St. Louis, Minneapolis, Kansas City, Dallas, and San Francisco. Webster's New Internal, Dick. 1462. Elastic currency is the same as a rubber check. In other words, it has no funds to back it up. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 was a scrip act, establishing a privately owned bank, which is not a federal bank at all. The act authorized a central bank, which was established to issue interest-bearing scrip. This was done by bookkeeping entries. This scrip was printed as Federal Reserve notes and is not lawful money, but rather a note which is passed from person to person without being cashed for lawful money. It has the effect of a rubber check that bounces from one person to another without ever being redeemed for the money that is supposed to back it up. And isn't it interesting that 1. None of these 12 Federal Reserve banks is located in Washington, D.C., where it would be under the direction of the government. 2. None of them is on government land or in government buildings. 3. No employees are employed by the U.S. government. 4. These are 12 private banks and not one central government bank. 5. Even though government agencies must have annual audits of their affairs, the Federal Reserve has refused every audit. 6. Government buildings pay no real estate taxes, which the Federal Reserve has to pay on their buildings. Even the U.S. President has no jurisdiction over the Federal Reserve because it is not a government agency. President Lyndon Johnson admitted this when he was asked about credit tightening policies of the Federal Reserve. He replied, "It's not my job to approve or disapprove. It is the action of the Federal Reserve." U.S. News and World Report. May 5, 1969. It was propaganda that influenced some of the congressmen to pass the 16th Amendment. A smokescreen was sent up saying that this amendment would strip Wall Street bankers of their political power. It turned out that it was the Wall Street bankers that had introduced the Federal Reserve Act. Below is a copy of the Federal Reserve Act as it was signed by President Woodrow Wilson 2 days before Christmas 1913. 63rd Congress of the United States of America. At the second session, begun and held at the city of Washington on Monday, the first day of December, 1913. An act to provide for the establishment of Federal Reserve banks, to furnish an elastic currency, to afford means of discounting commercial paper, to establish a more effective supervision of banking in the United States, and for other purposes. Be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of America in Congress assembled, that the short title of this act shall by the Federal Reserve Act. Speaker of the House of Representatives, Vice President of the United States, and President of the Senate. Approved 23 December 1913. Woodrow Wilson. In 1791, Thomas Jefferson was appraised of a national or central banking system by private bankers. He made a long list of reasons why such a thing should not occur in America. Besides being against the Constitution, he said it would be a monopoly on money. They would gain power to buy off whomever they wanted, including Congress. It would enable them, as a corporation, to receive grants of land. They would gain the power to make laws favoring themselves and against state laws. They would eventually be beyond the control of the states. Jefferson then added, to take a single step beyond the boundaries thus specially drawn around the powers of Congress is to take possession of a boundless field of power, no longer susceptible of any definition. The Writings of Thomas Jefferson, H. E. Berg, 3 145. Article 1, Sec. 8, par. 5 of the Constitution clearly relegates the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof to Congress, but the Federal Reserve stripped Congress of that right. Jefferson provided for a check and balance system in the Constitution, but that was undermined by the Federal Reserve. From within the government, an agent of the big bankers can persuade and direct the financial interests of the government to obtain loans from the Federal Reserve. Wars can be created for the purpose of borrowing money to fight its wars. The Federal Reserve is willing and able to loan them billions of paper dollars with interest, of course. A group of multi-millionaires bought Jekyll Island near Georgia as a winter sport retreat and called themselves the Jekyll Island Hunt Club, which was used for hunting expeditions. The warm winter climate was an attraction away from cold New York, so they decided to build a few cottages which by our standards were lavish mansions. It was a perfect place for a secret meeting 50 miles away from any journalist or reporter, yet so secret that everyone could use only their first names. They thought it rather novel and called themselves the First Name Club. All of the regular servants who knew them were dismissed, and new ones were brought in for 2 weeks. Why all the secrecy, if they were plotting some wonderful thing for the people? The reason is that it was a wonderful thing for them. The Jekyll Island group remained on the island for 9 days, but no one shot even one duck. It's very difficult to shoot ducks from inside of an elaborate mansion. The account of this secret financial conspiracy was recorded in 1916 by a financial writer named Bertie Charles Forbes, who later founded the Forbes magazine. According to his story, it all began with Senator Nelson Aldrich, who planned a duck hunt for 6 important bankers. He told them he was going to isolate them on Jekyll Island, no connection to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, with the object of creating a super banking system. Such was the birth of the Federal Reserve. Forbes wrote, "Picture a party of the nation's greatest bankers stealing out of New York on a private railroad car under cover of darkness, stealthily hieing hundreds of miles south, embarking on a mysterious launch, sneaking onto an island deserted by all but a few servants, living there a full week under such rigid secrecy that the names of not one of them was once mentioned lest the servants learn the identity and disclose to the world the strangest, most secret expedition in the history of American finance. I am not romancing. I am giving to the world, for the first time, The real story of how the famous Aldrich currency report, the foundation of our new currency system, was written. The utmost secrecy was enjoined upon all. The public must not glean a hint of what was to be done. Senator Aldrich notified each one to go quietly into a private car, of which the railroad had received orders to draw up on an unfrequented platform. Of the party set. Current Opinion, December 1916, page 382. The noted banker and agent of the Rockefellers, Frank Vanderlip, admitted to the story of Jekyll Island in his autobiography, From Farm Boy to Financier. He wrote, "Our secret expedition to Jekyll Island was the occasion of the actual conception of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System. The essential points of the Aldrich Plan were all contained in the Federal Reserve Act as it was passed. Despite my views about the value to society of greater publicity for the affairs of corporations, there was an occasion, near the close of 1910, when I was as secretive, indeed as furtive as any conspirator. I do not feel it is any exaggeration to speak of our secret expedition to Jekyll Island as the occasion of the actual conception of what eventually became the Federal Reserve System." Frank Vanderlip, Farm Boy to Financier, Saturday Evening Post, February 9, 1935, page 25. Paul Warburg wrote a massive book of 1750 pages called The Federal Reserve System, Its Origin and Growth, but nowhere in the book does he mention Jekyll Island. He mentions the meeting that decided the system, but does not mention who attended or where it was held. This was a momentous meeting which would control the money and credit of the nation, but it was referred to only briefly. The results of the conference were entirely confidential. Even the fact that there had been a meeting was not permitted to become public. Though 18 years have since gone by, I do not feel free to give a description of this most interesting conference which Senator Aldrich pledged all participants to secrecy. Vol. 1, page 60. Congressman McFadden made a speech to Congress on June 10, 1932, with a direct word of warning about the Federal Reserve System. "Mr. Chairman, we have in this country one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever known. I refer to the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks. The depredations and the inequities of the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks acting together have cost this country enough money to pay the national debt several times over. This evil institution has impoverished and ruined the people of the United States. Some people think the Federal Reserve Banks are United States government institutions. They are not government institutions. They are private credit monopolies which prey upon the people of the United States for the benefit of themselves and their foreign customers, foreign and domestic speculators and swindlers, and rich and predatory moneylenders. Those 12 private credit monopolies were deceitfully and disloyally foisted upon this country by bankers who came here from Europe and who repaid us for our hospitality by undermining our American institutions. The wealth of the United States and the working capital of the United States has been taken away from them and has either been locked in the vaults of certain banks and great corporations or exported to foreign countries for the benefit of the foreign customers of those banks and corporations. The sack of the United States by the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks and their confederates is the greatest crime in history. The Federal Reserve Act should be repealed, and the Federal Reserve Banks, having violated their charters, should be liquidated immediately. McFadden's speech, Congressional Record, pages 12,595 to 12,603. Loaning money to governments can be a very lucrative business, especially the loans to the U.S. government that owes more money to the international bankers than all the rest of the nations combined. They no longer refer to millions and billions, it is now trillions. Dr. Quigley said it best when he described the aim of these imperial bankers, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. The New American Conspiracy, page 23. The banking systems of the Rockefellers and Morgans had greater assets than the total wealth of 21 U.S. states. Morgan had control of many corporations including U.S. Steel, and A&T Rockefeller had Standard Oil, Chase Manhattan Bank, and other corporations. Quigley states that these two alone could have wrecked the economic system of the country, but so far they have greatly gained from it. They established the Bank of England, which had the appearance of being a government institution, but in reality was a private bank. Similar systems were established in Switzerland, France, and Italy. Eventually these banking families became so dynamic that there was little in business or politics that did not escape their machinery. They had established a monopoly of finance throughout the world. Professor E. R. Seligman, a member of the international banking family and head of the Department of Economics at Columbia University, wrote, "It is known to a very few how great is the indebtedness of the United States to Mr. Warburg. For it may be said without fear of contradiction that in its fundamental features the Federal Reserve Act is the work of Mr. Warburg more than any other man in the country. The existence of a Federal Reserve Board creates, in everything but in name, a real central bank." Academy of Political Science, Seligman, 4 387. At the time the Federal Reserve Act was written, the public debt was almost non-existent. Now that the U.S. public debt is past the $6 trillion mark, we may indeed admit how much we are indebted to the great Mr. Warburg. The 6 members of the Jekyll Island Hunting Club, who secretly conspired this reserve bank system, represented 1/6 of the total wealth of the world. By now, with the implementation of the Federal Reserve, they must have increased that percentage considerably. Isn't it interesting that the institution that A. sets the interest rates of our national economy, B. controls our currency, and C. is not accountable to anyone, has more financial control of our nation than the President of the United States? In an interview and debate among Governor Clinton, President Bush and Ross Perot, none of them thought there was anything wrong with that system. However, a closer look shows that it is totally unconstitutional, it is a ridiculous, unfair financial conglomerate, and it is the worst form of robbery of the American people. The fact is that the Federal Reserve notes, which we call money, are issued by the privately owned Federal Reserve banks and are merely promissory notes or promises to pay. A note is not money, it is a note. A check is not money, it is a note. But there is a difference between a Federal Reserve note and a United States note. The Federal Reserve note is not redeemable, which means there is no gold at the Federal Reserve to back it up. The United States note is good as gold, and there is no interest paid to the Federal Reserve for the use of it. One man had the courage to avoid this cartel, President John F. Kennedy. He authorized the printing of government money instead of using Federal Reserve notes, but the project lasted only about a month. The last U.S. notes authorized to be printed in the United States were authorized by President Kennedy shortly before his assassination in Dallas. On June 30, 1963, Kennedy signed Exec. Order number 11110, further amended EO Mo. 10289, September 1951, thereby giving the President authority to issue the currency. He thereupon ordered the issue of $4,292,893,815 in lawful American money, which was not interest-bearing currency, as are the Federal Reserve notes. The printing order was rescinded as one of President Lyndon B. Johnson's first official acts after he succeeded Kennedy. At least he knew why he had ascended to the presidential chair. The Rape of Justice, Mullins, page 471. The men who run the Federal Reserve are very cunning, dangerous, and evil. They steal, they assassinate, and they create wars, all because of their love of money and power. They are apostles of the Prince of Darkness and they serve him well. Probably the most frequently asked questions about the Federal Reserve Bank are as follows. 1. What is the Federal Reserve System? First of all, it is not federal, it has no reserves, and it is not a system, but rather a conspiracy and syndicate to commit robbery. It is privately owned, but gives the appearance of a government agency. Its main objective is to provide financing for wars. It functions as a money monopoly throughout the world. 2. Is the Federal Reserve System a government agency? The government of the United States has never owned a single share of Federal Reserve Bank stock. Paul Warburg, a representative of the Rothschild Bank, got the name Federal out of thin air. His object for creating the Federal Reserve Bank was to provide an elastic currency which we would call a rubber check. 3. Are our dollar bills government money? Each bill is marked Federal Reserve note, which means it is a check, not actual money. However, it is a paper promise to pay real money. They are not backed with gold or silver, as they once were, and as they should now be. They are backed only by paper, known as fiat money. The government prints these bills by a contract from the Federal Reserve, each bill costing about 0.0026 cents to print, but then the United States begins to pay the Federal Reserve interest on the denomination printed on that paper. 4. Who owns stock in the Federal Reserve banks? Only the ruling internationalists, who are the banking barons of the world, own the stock. They are loyal to no race, religion, or nation. They include such families as the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Warburgs, Schiffs, Harrimans, and Morgans. They are the super rich who created the Federal Reserve and are the owners of it. 5. Can anyone buy Federal Reserve stock? No, the Federal Reserve Act prohibits any stock of the Federal Reserve to be bought or sold on any stock exchange. It is reserved for the elite bankers of the world. More than half of the stockholders of the Federal Reserve are not even Americans. The world's great heroes receive medals, statues, and monuments for their contributions to mankind. Books and magazine articles are written about such magnificent accomplishments and victories. But where are the monuments and glowing reports of the men from Jekyll Island and their contributions to mankind? Attending this remote and secretive meeting were some of the richest, most powerful and brilliant men of our age. After 9 days of profound study and research, they came up with a program that would affect millions of people, both here and abroad. It would involve the wealth of the world along with all its governments. So, why didn't they get some medals, statues, and monuments? Why didn't anyone get the news and write up a report of what a wonderful thing these men have done for mankind? The answer is simple. They have robbed trillions of dollars from the public. They have created wars so they could loan their worthless federal notes to governments at a high rate of interest. And they have been guilty of nearly every possible evil that men can devise, including murder, to get more money. No wonder mankind has not bestowed upon them any great honors. 4. Foreign aid and national debt. Give to him that asketh thee, and from him that would borrow of thee turn not thou away. Matt. 5:42. There are numerous organizations set up for helping unfortunate and poor people. Small donation containers in grocery stores and gas stations are all over. Television promotions plead for financial help in behalf of barefoot and destitute children in Nigeria, India, or other third world countries. These organizations sometimes take in millions of dollars. However, it has been discovered that frequently only about 10% ever gets to the victims themselves. The founders and administrators of the programs first pay themselves exorbitant wages and are provided with tremendous expense accounts. Since the United States government is supposed to be the richest and strongest government on earth, it is expected to give billions of dollars to less fortunate nations. Where does all that money come from? The government has little or no money of its own. It takes it from the American people by excessive taxation. Here again is the principle of socialism. It is an illegal act of government against the will of its people. The story of national and foreign aid cannot be told without reference to David Crockett. We generally recognize him as one of 6 survivors of the Battle of the Alamo and his later capture and execution on March 6, 1836. However, prior to that he had been a member of the Tennessee legislature and then was elected to the U.S. Congress. One day in the House of Representatives, a bill was proposed to appropriate money for the benefit of a widow of a distinguished naval officer. Several beautiful speeches had been made in support, and votes were about to be taken when Crockett arose and said, "I have as much respect for the memory of the deceased, and as much sympathy for the sufferings of the living, if suffering there be, as any man in this house, but we must not permit our respect for the dead, or our sympathy for a part of the living, to lead us into an act of injustice to the balance of the living. I will not go into an argument to prove that Congress has no power to appropriate this money as an act of charity. Every member upon this floor knows it. We have the right, as individuals, to give away as much of our own money as we please in charity, but as members of Congress we have no right to so appropriate a dollar of the public money. I am the poorest man on this floor. I cannot vote for this bill, but I will give 1 week's pay to the object, and if every member of Congress will do the same, it will amount to more than the bill asks." He took his seat. Nobody replied. The bill was not passed. David Crockett on Federal Aid, page 1. In time, however, this whole matter was forgotten, and men began to violate the Constitution on this issue. We now have federal emergency and catastrophe aids, local road and federal highway funds, etc. There are all sorts of business and education aids and grants. There are appropriations for the largest spending department of the government in their health, education, and welfare agency. But all this is small compared to the great welfare program called foreign aid. There are few actions that bring greater personal joy and reward than that of helping a person who is needy or destitute, but there is something wrong with a government program that steals money from its own citizens and gives it away to their enemies. The American foreign aid program has many flaws that would need to be corrected before it could be classified as a good program, such as 1. The American people did not vote for it. 2. The government has no right to take money from people who do not want to contribute to it. 3. Most of our foreign aid is not given to the people that it was supposed to help. 4. Most foreign aid given to governments is used for arms and ammunition for wars. 5. Most of the aid is given to our enemies who want to bury us. 6. It causes more poverty among the American people. 7. It increases taxation which is never diminished or removed. 8. It builds up competition against us. 9. It creates more harmful and worthless agencies in our government. 10. It has created monsters out of the worst national leaders in the world. The greatest threat to world peace comes from nations who have benefited from our foreign aid program. What better way to conquer a people than to make them poor? An impoverished nation is easy to subdue and control because they have neither the will nor the means of resistance. The way to get a rich nation to spend its money is to spend it for them. To do that, you must take over the high positions of finance and power in their government. Unfortunately, our foreign aid has not financed freedom in foreign lands, rather it finances socialism. Socializing the economies of all nations will merge them into a one-world system, which was the original objective of the creators of our foreign aid program. Each year, as protests against foreign aid spending develop, Americans are told that, because they are the richest people on earth, they must help the poorer countries to keep them from going communist. Foreign aid has been used to socialize the economics of once friendly nations. Established patterns of life have been disrupted. Nations have been socialized, friends have been antagonized and destroyed, and the drain on the U.S. economy, public and private, could bring an economic collapse and the socialization of America. If foreign aid were limited to small grants for technical assistance to show people how to help themselves, it might do a good job. That was not the role Stalin foresaw for foreign aid, and that is not how it has been administered by American planners. None dare call it treason. John Stormer, pages 218-19. When our government gives foreign aid to other countries, it should be expected that they pay it back. However, this rarely, if ever, happens. For example, after Russia's atomic meltdown, we sent them money, equipment, and manpower with technology to solve the problem. Russia never paid any of it back. On the other hand, when disaster strikes American citizens, the U.S. government quickly comes to help with interest-bearing loans that have to be paid back. All in all, it is improbable that Congress ever passed another bill more destructive of American constitutional principles, more harmful to our nation politically, economically, morally, and militarily, and more helpful to communism socialism all over the earth than the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961, which was, from beginning to end, a product of the Council on Foreign Relations. Invisible Government, Dan Smoot, page 134. The following are some of the countries that have received foreign aid from the United States: Afghanistan, Algeria, Angola, Argentina, Austria, Australia, Bangladesh, Belgium, Belize, Benin, Bolivia, Botswana, Brazil, Burkina, Burma, Burundi, Rwanda, Cambodia, Cameroon, Canada, Cape Verde, Chad, Chile, China, Colombia, Costa Rica, Cyprus, Denmark, Dominican Republic, Egypt, El Salvador, England, Ecuador, Ethiopia, Finland, France, Gabon, Gambia, Germany, Ghana, Greece, Guatemala, Guyana, Haiti, Honduras, Hong Kong, Iceland, India, Indonesia, Iran, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Jamaica, Japan, Jordan, Kenya, Korea, Lebanon, Liberia, Madagascar, Malawi, Malaysia, Marshall Islands, Manana, Mexico, Niger, Morocco, Mozambique, Nepal, New Zealand, Oman, Pakistan, Panama, Peru, Philippines, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Senegal, Sri Lanka, Somalia, South Africa, South Union, Spain, Sweden, Taiwan, Thailand, Togo, Trinidad, Tunisia, Turkey, Uganda, Uruguay, Venezuela, Yemen, Yugoslavia, Zaire, Zambia, Zimbabwe. The Constitution, to be worth anything, must be held sacred, with all of its provisions strictly observed. The man who wields so much power in its administration can be its worst enemy. Minor infractions can become major disasters. The power of collecting money is a dangerous one. Once Congress begins to usurp this power, there is no end to its violations of the Constitution or its weakening of the principles of morality. The Constitution does not give the central government the power to take tribute from the American people and then give it to foreign, alien and enemy governments. I am not for increasing, by every device, the public debt, on the principle of its being a public blessing. To preserve our independence, we must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. We must make our election between economy and liberty, or profusion and servitude. The Wisdom of Thomas Jefferson, page 90. A century ago America was almost without debt. Today the national debt amounts to a staggering $6 trillion. With the addition of many new government agencies, which were supposed to help Americans, they have nearly destroyed our nation, including the Constitution. When a nation becomes poor, it loses power and becomes ripe for destruction. The enemy knows this, and many poor nations have been either overthrown from within or taken over from without. America is the furthest in debt of any nation on earth, and we continue to increase that debt. It has been planned that way. 5. Press. William Jefferson Clinton. A naughty person, a wicked man, walketh with a froward unruly mouth. He winketh with his eyes, he speaketh with his feet, he teacheth with his fingers. Frowardness is in his heart, he deviseth mischief continually, he soweth discord. Therefore shall his calamity come suddenly, suddenly shall he be broken without remedy. Proverbs 6:12-15. On Saturday, December 8, 1998, President William J. Clinton became the second president and the first elected president to be impeached by the House of Representatives. 2 articles of impeachment were approved: obstruction of justice and perjury before a grand jury. Other objections were also presented for consideration. The public knew he was also guilty of abuse of power in office, public immoralities, and disregard for the U.S. Constitution. In addition to the above, press. Clinton has also been pushing strongly for a socialized government for America. Rather than see Clinton thrown out of office, Bob Dole defended him with a proposal that the president sign a tenure for government officials as an apology, thus supporting another unconstitutional fiasco. In the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton wrote, "No legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution can be valid." Fed. Papers number 78, Clinton was guilty and should pay for his crimes, not make an apology for them. Military action at the time of the hearings was, in effect, a means of distraction. It was a good theater performance, but unfortunately, it resulted in the killing of many people. William Jefferson Clinton did not become corrupt after he became U.S. president. This was achieved while he was governor of Arkansas and even before. Much of his sordid and evil lifestyle was related by his high school buddies to investigators after he had achieved his notoriety. It was a curious thing to some of his former classmates how a draft dodger could become commander-in-chief of the U.S. military. In a recent documentary called Policygate, some of Clinton's nefarious deeds were exposed to the public by police, highway patrolmen, legislators, and even the members of general public. His vices included prostitutes, mistresses, robbery, drug dealing, and he was even suspected of murder. At the point where national security was being threatened, several police and state officials decided to tell what they knew. Clinton's life story would make an interesting X-rated movie. But in reality, he is just the kind of man wanted and needed by those who are planning the One World conspiracy movement. To achieve the objectives of the New World Order, it requires men who are traitors, vain, corrupt, vicious, and without conscience. Good people could not tolerate the evil plans of the conspirators, nor would good people be tolerated by the conspirators. They are natural enemies to each other. The New York Post quoted Scott Ritter, former chief of the UN weapons importation, concerning Clinton's start of the Balkan War. "This was designed to generate a conflict that would justify a bombing, and you have no choice but to interpret this as WAG the dog. Taking air, January 7, 1999. In other words, it would draw attention away from him during the impeachment, which it did. Clinton used American military for personal gain, at the cost of over 200 lives. The office of the president is meant to serve the people, not the person himself. Wars are started by the leaders of nations, not the people in them. The impeachment trials did not cover the real crimes and sins of the president, the ones that should require even capital punishment. Yet in spite of all that was revealed, Al Gore still got up during the impeachment proceedings and said he is the greatest president in history." December 11, 1998. Compare the above with what the Lord has said, "Wherefore, honest men and wise men should be sought for diligently, and good men and wise men ye should observe to uphold. Otherwise whatsoever is less than these cometh of evil." D&C 98:10. The American people have certainly failed in this regard. As we enter another millennium, we are also moving out of an era of great prosperity, blessings, and scientific achievements. We are faced with the prospects of poverty, war, and an economic and political breakdown. A dark cloud hangs over our nation. 5 major events have recently occurred in this downward spiral. 1. President Bill Clinton embarrassed the nation with his perjuries, obstructions of justice, corruptions, and immoralities. 2. To avert an almost certain financial crash, the Treasury and Federal Reserve put $200 billion of U.S. taxpayer funds into the financial markets. 3. Clinton personally created a war without the vote of the American people or the vote of Congress. 4. Phony statistics by the government give a false security about the prosperity and employment rates in America. The Clinton administration has created trade agreements with other countries resulting in an annual deficit of $250 billion. 5. We have now reached a global debt of $12 trillion, and it's still growing. Who is this guy who is so cowardly that he ran off to Canada to avoid the draft for the Vietnam War, but yet later becomes the commander-in-chief of our armed forces? What kind of reasoning does he use to justify the disarming of America so it will save lives, but then he starts a war all by himself by sending American troops to the Balkans, where thousands of innocent people would be killed? He has closed many of our military bases, shut down the production of defense weapons, and began disarming the military and civilian population. Then he has given our enemies military arms and weapons without the consent of Congress or the American people. Whose side is he on anyway? In a television appearance on April 9, 1994, President Clinton said, "When we got organized as a country, we wrote a fairly radical constitution with a radical Bill of Rights, giving a radical amount of individual freedom to Americans. There's a lot of irresponsibility, so a lot of people say there's too much personal freedom. When personal freedom's being abused, you have to move to limit it." New American, page 27. So Clinton is saying that our freedom is radical and that our government should move in and take away all excessive freedoms allowed by the Constitution. Public Law 87-297 is an act to establish a United States Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, which became effective in 1961. The original act was amended in 1983, 22 U.S.C. 2568, Section 3 of Public Law 98-202. It appears to have been amended several times and calls for the elimination of the U.S. National Armed Forces and states that no one may possess a firearm or lethal weapon except police and military personnel. This law is taught and explained in the National War College and various U.S. Armed Forces academies. As the military installations around the nation are being eliminated, Clinton has been bringing in UN troops from China, Russia, and Germany, and they are to help to disarm America under this and other public laws. Bill Clinton has illegally released millions of acres of United States land to be under the control of the UN in the Biosphere Reserve Act and the American Rivers Heritage Act, where now only the UN can go. He made every effort to give some of the California ports to the Chinese. Clinton has committed high treason for aiding and abetting enemies and foreigners to obtain American land and supplies. He has allowed over 1 million hostile foreign troops to occupy and train in these areas while closing U.S. military bases. If all this is not enough for impeachment, then consider these words and who said them. Yes, the president should resign. He has lied to the American people time and time again and betrayed their trust. He is no longer an effective leader. Since he has admitted guilt, there is no reason to put the American people through an impeachment. He will serve absolutely no purpose in finishing out his term. The only possible solution is for the president to save some dignity and resign. William Jefferson Clinton, 1974, referring to President Richard Nixon. In a Select House Committee classified report, it states that China has obtained some of the most sensitive American military technology, including nuclear weapons. China has acquired a range of technical secrets far beyond satellite and missile-related technology during the Clinton administration. Representative Christopher Cox, Republican of California, the committee's chairman, said that China's acquisition of our technology has harmed our national security. The panel has made a 700-page report, but it is secret because so much of it deals with classified weaponry. There has been a great deal of uproar over press. Clinton's helping the Chinese acquire some of our most sophisticated missile guidance systems. When this was exposed, Americans accused China of stealing our top military secrets, but the Chinese responded that they did not steal them, they paid Clinton for them. One of the national magazines recently printed the following picture of Clinton dressed in Chinese attire. A Chinese restaurant employee interpreted the writing as, "Even though we are on different fronts, the revolution will be successful." Picture. There was a law, now repealed, U.S. Code Title 50, Chapter 23, that stated, "It shall be unlawful for any person knowingly to combine, conspire, or agree with any other person to perform any act which would substantially contribute to the establishment within the United States of a totalitarian dictatorship, as defined in paragraph 15 or section 782 of this title, the direction and control of which is to be vested in, or exercised in or under the domination or control of any foreign government or foreign organization. However, in 1993 President Clinton signed Public Law 103-199, Section 803, which repealed the above law. Why doesn't someone step forward and do something to stop this traitorous man? Many people have claimed they were going to do just that, but coincidentally they decided to commit suicide or had a terrible accident. It is reported that 114 or more such people have had accidents. Being close to Clinton and witnessing some of his activities is considered to be the most dangerous occupation in America. When Thomas Jefferson said, "The will of the people is the only legitimate foundation of any government," Wisdom of Thomas Jefferson, E. Boykin, page 61, he was claiming that if the people do not get to vote on issues and laws, then we have an illegitimate government. What good is voting for candidates and not for laws, especially when so many candidates are against the Constitution? Citizens of this nation should have the right to vote for something other than officers, especially when the candidates are all corrupt. It is said that a nation deserves no better leaders than what they get. If that is true, then America needs to undergo a deep spiritual repentance. 6. Unlawful executive orders. We have allowed the executive branch, through various executive orders, to usurp what is legitimately and constitutionally our right and responsibility. Senator Tim Hutchinson, R. Arkansas, 9/1897. Our founding fathers established a republic with a highly effective system of checks and balances to prevent all power from being invested in just one individual or department. The plan for an executive order, a presidential proclamation giving the president power and authority for rulemaking in the executive branch, was originally a genuine delegation of power based on law and good judgment. It pertained only to government agencies. Unfortunately, executive orders have been corrupted and abused as a means for illegitimate creation of new laws which Congress would never pass through regular channels. President Clinton and other Clintonites have sought ways to skirt around the U.S. Constitution. It has been difficult and has taken a long time to accomplish, but they have done it. They have found a loophole whereby they could undermine and usurp the powers and laws of the Constitution. But this was prophesied to happen, as explained in a pamphlet published by Apostle Parley P. Pratt entitled The Angel of the Prairies, A Dream of the Future, published in 1880. In this recorded dream or vision, an angel spoke of the future and destiny of America. The American system was indeed glorious in its beginning and was founded by wise and good men, in opposition to long-established abuses and oppressive systems of the old world. But it had its weaknesses and imperfections. These were taken advantage of by wicked and conspiring men who were unwisely placed at the head of government and who, by a loose and corrupt administration, gradually undermined that beautiful structure. In their polluted hands justice faltered, truth fell to the ground, equity could not enter, and virtue fled into the wilderness. pp.1617. One of the weaknesses and imperfections mentioned by the angel was undoubtedly a function called executive orders, wherein the president has power to make directives, not laws, for situations requiring action for certain high-level problems or emergencies. This is not the kind of power that should be used to change constitutional laws nor create wars, etc. It is a power that, when used wrongfully, could become an illegitimate creation for a corrupt national administration. Thomas Jefferson had foreseen this danger as well. I see with the deepest affliction the rapid strides with which the federal branch of our government is advancing towards the usurpation of all the rights reserved to the states and the consolidation in itself of all powers, foreign and domestic, and that too, by constructions which, if legitimate, leaves no limits to their power. The Wisdom of Thomas Jefferson, Edward Boykin, pages 35-36. Such powers in government are not new. They were adopted by Adolf Hitler in Germany. In his rise to power, he created a terrorist attack with the burning of the Reichstag in February 1933. This was his excuse to get legislative support for increasing his power through executive orders. On March 9, 1933, Hitler's government installed Reich commissars to replace state governors. On March 31, he dissolved all state assemblies, and on April 7, he issued a law appointing Reich governors in all states to reconstitute state and local governments. Each governor was a National Social Party member and was required to follow the policies laid down by the Reich Chancellor, Hitler himself. On January 30, 1934, Hitler made his final triumph over Germany with his executive order for reconstruction of the Reich. State government became administrative agencies, and all their powers were transferred to the Federal Reich government. Americans have since wondered how such smart people as the Germans would be so stupid as to let a man like Hitler get so much power and become their dictator. However, in America we have allowed a similar power seeker to get into the presidency of our country. The parallels between Hitler's executive tyranny and those fashioned by Bill Clinton are too similar to be merely coincidence. John McAlvany reported, in his first 2 days in office, with the stroke of a pen, he signed 5 executive orders allowing homosexuals in the military, extending U.S. aid for UN-sponsored abortion and population control, ordered abortions to be performed in U.S. military hospitals, rescinded the ban on the use of fetal tissue, i.e., dead babies, in federally sponsored research, and abolished the Bush administration Council on Competitiveness, which gave businesses and large corporations a way to obtain exemptions from government regulations. None of these unilateral decrees would have been passed by Congress. Clinton and his subordinates have made no secret of their strategy to bypass Congress and rule by executive orders or presidential decision directives. McAlvany Intelligence Report, January 1999, page 13. The Wall Street Journal, 8/6/98, reported, President Clinton has pursued an executive order strategy that goes way beyond trying to guide federal agencies in how to implement laws. Instead, it seeks to actively put in place policies Congress would never adopt. Last week, the White House admitted that a May executive order gutting major powers of state and local governments had been drafted in secret without consulting them. Such orders have distorted the rights and powers of the president because they usually create problems that are worse than those they were meant to resolve. Once again, from John McAlvany, the U.S. Constitution grants the president no lawmaking authority, yet throughout his term in office, Bill Clinton has preferred to rule by decree through the writing of hundreds of executive orders and presidential decision directives, rather than carry out his constitutional duty to execute laws properly enacted by Congress. So, the most corrupt president in U.S. history, stymied by Congress in the passage of his socialist agenda, has assumed dictatorial powers never intended by the Constitution, our founding fathers, the Congress and the American people. If he is not removed from office, and he probably will not be, he will assume dictatorial powers via martial law and a state of national emergency, completely suspending the Constitution, the power of the Congress, and probably the year 2000 elections. A president who will bomb another country, costing the lives of thousands of innocent Iraqi victims, as Clinton just did, in order to forestall a vote of impeachment and retain his power, is a desperate and dangerous man who will do anything, even if it destroys the country, to retain his hold on the presidency. McAlvany Intelligence Report, January 1999, page 13. Listed below are only a few of the hundreds of executive orders signed by Clinton during his 2 terms, increasing his power and control. EO 10995, All Communication Media. EO 10997, Electrical Power, Petroleum, Natural Gas, Fuels and Minerals, Public and Private. EO 10998, Food Supplies, Farms and Farm Equipment, and Agricultural Facilities. EO 10999, Seizure of all kinds of transportation including any personal car. EO 11000, Seizure of all civilians for work under federal supervision. EO 11001, Seizure of all health, education, hospitals, and schools. EO 11002, Empowered to register every man, woman, and child. EO 11003, Seizure of all aircraft and airports by the federal government. EO 11004, Seizure of all housing and moving population from one locality to another. EO 11005, Seizure of railroads, waterways, and storage facilities. EO 11490, Presidential control over all citizens, businesses and churches. EO 11921, Seize control over education, welfare, production, wages, credit and flow of money and total censorship. EO 12919, President has total control over all public and private materials, food sources, farm equipment, energy, and transportation. Everything will be under the control of FEMA. This EO gives President Clinton power to implement martial law under a national state of emergency, giving FEMA police force powers over the nation. It can be argued that the president can use this power only during a national state of emergency. That is true. However, on November 14, 1994, President Clinton got around that by signing Executive Order 12,938, which declared that we are in a national state of emergency. Regarding this press, Bill Clinton explained on November 14, 1994, by Executive Order 12,938, I declared a national emergency with respect to the unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States posed by the proliferation of nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons, weapons of mass destruction, and the means of delivering such weapons. Because the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and the means of delivering them continue to pose an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security, foreign policy, and economy of the United States, the national emergency declared on November 14, 1994, and extended on November 14, 1995, and November 14, 1996, must continue in effect beyond November 14, 1997. McElveny Report, January 1999. It was Bill Clinton who gave these weapons delivery systems to the Chinese and Russian governments. Another threatening order signed by Clinton is the following: the implementation of human rights treaties, EO 13107, on December 10. While America focused on the impeachment, Clinton quietly signed a seditious new executive order that would create a massive and intrusive federal bureaucracy to monitor and enforce compliance with the United Nations human rights regulations and treaties. One of those treaties, the unratified Convention on the Rights of the Child, which takes away all parental rights in raising their children, would be included. These UN treaties and regulations could have been written by global socialists or communists in Russia, Red China, or Cuba and are totally destructive of Americans' freedoms. Clinton's timing on entering this EO in the Federal Register is perfect. The Congress was about to adjourn for Christmas. After 30 days, with no congressional objection, it will become law. I bid. Why does Clinton want to seize so much power and control? Does this sound like a wise man or an unwise dictator? Why did Clinton sign several hundred executive orders for power when there was no need for them? We have had a president who will enforce unlawful orders, start a war to avoid impeachment conviction, break his oath of office, oppose the Constitution, corrupt the office of the president with his immoralities, undermine the economy of the country, and prove to be a traitor by giving secret information to enemies of our country. Who benefits from all these executive orders? Is it Bill Clinton himself? The New World Order? The secret combinations? The answer is rather simple, it's all of them. 7. The oath of office. Taking an oath of office is required by every civil servant from president to postman, pledging their support of the U.S. Constitution. I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter, so help me God. Civil servant employment application. Most of us probably remember that as elementary school students, each morning we stood with our hand over our heart and said, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. But today there are students who instead burn the flag and have no allegiance to anyone or anything except themselves. We have arrived at a time when the importance of pledging allegiance to the flag and supporting the U.S. Constitution is downplayed, not just within our schools, but in adult life as well. 1. Edgar Hoover, former head of the FBI, warned about this in a speech at Valley Forge on February 22, 1962. Too often in recent years, patriotic symbols have been shunned aside. Our national heroes have been maligned, our history distorted. Has it become a disgrace to pledge allegiance to our flag, to sign a loyalty oath, or pay tribute to our national anthem? Congressional Record, March 1, 1962, page 2906. Of these 6 disgraceful acts by the American people, which one would you consider to be the most serious? If you answered a disgrace to sign a loyalty oath, you were correct. Our founding fathers wisely placed in the Constitution an oath of office for the incumbent president and other government officers. Before he enters on the execution of his office, he shall take the following oath or affirmation: I do solemnly swear, or affirm, that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and will to the best of my ability, preserve, protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. The senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislatures, and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution. Article 2, Section 1. For those who don't uphold their oath of office, the Prophet Joseph Smith proposed the following serious consequence. The Constitution should contain a provision that every officer of the government who should neglect or refuse to extend a protection guaranteed in the Constitution should be subject to capital punishment. TPJS, page 327. Sometimes people take an oath, either in ignorance or willfully, which is contrary to the U.S. Constitution. An example is the oath of office which every employee must sign before they can work for the United Nations offices in New York City. I solemnly affirm to exercise in all loyalty, discretion and conscience the functions entrusted to me as a member of the International Service of the United Nations, to discharge those functions and regulate my conduct with the interests of the United Nations only in view, and not to seek or accept instructions in respect to the performance of my duties from any government or other authority external to the organization. The Fearful Master, Edward Griffin, page 81. This oath clearly states that it does not recognize the U.S. Constitution nor that of any other government. Employees of the UN are expected to regard the Constitution as having priority over the American Constitution. Signing this UN oath violates the oath to support the U.S. Constitution. In reality, it should have no more priority over the Constitution of the United States than does any oath from an organization or corporation, such as General Motors, Federal Express, or Burger King. There are important reasons for requiring incumbents in government or other employment to sign a loyalty oath. 1. By having an employee sign an agreement or binding contract, it requires him to do specific things for you. He knows exactly what is expected of him and he is under your jurisdiction. At the same time, it also spells out certain things you will do for him. 2. If an employee did not sign some agreement or contract, he could come to work at noon and leave a couple of hours later. Or, you could promise him $25 an hour, but change your mind and pay him only $5 on payday. All this because there was no prior signed contract. 3. If he signed an oath or contract and then failed to comply with the terms, he would be in violation and subject to penalty. Below is a copy of the oath of office that all Utah state office holders are supposed to sign. Oath of office. State of Utah. SS. County of Salt Lake. I, name, do solemnly swear that I will support, obey and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Utah, and that I will perform the duties of my office as office with fidelity. But a strange thing has happened. Although representatives, senators, and other state officers are required to sign this oath of office within 60 days, very few actually do it. For example, the following letter was written in response to a question of how many senators and representatives in Utah had signed their oath of office. Department of Administrative Services. Division of Archives and Record Services. State Capitol Archives Building. Salt Lake City, Utah 84114 1021. 80153833012. December 1, 1993. Dear Mr. Brown, the State Archives does not have oaths of office for members of the Utah State Senate for the years 1975, 1977, 1979, 1983, 1985, 1987 and 1989. We do have one oath of office for the year 1981, and that is for James F. Considine. We do not have oaths of office for members of the Utah House of Representatives for the years 1987, 1988, 1989, and 1990. If we can be of further help, please let us know. Sincerely, Jeffrey O. Johnson, Utah State Archivist. What does this mean? First, it could mean that they refuse to sign because it would make them subject to the punishments under the law should they fail to obey their oath. Secondly, it could mean that they have placed their allegiance with some other oath, organization, or constitution. Thirdly, according to law, it does mean that everything they vote for or act upon is unlawful and not binding under the laws of the state constitution. It is the main objective of conspirators to overthrow the Constitution and government of the United States. These geniuses put together a plan to gain control through corporations. Just as members sign an oath to the corporation of the United Nations, so they would bind others to the employment and service of corporations. The shrewdest manipulation was to incorporate the government of the United States and then subsequently incorporate all of the states. These satellite corporations must act under the jurisdiction of the federal corporation. By doing this, all of the state laws must comply to federal laws. Other agencies such as the Internal Revenue Service, Federal Reserve, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, etc., are legally, but not lawfully, working under the rules and laws of the corporation of the United States. We now have both a corporation government and a constitutional government of the United States. To simplify this, consider your driver's license. Under the U.S. Constitution, you have the right as a citizen to use all public roads. However, if you have signed up for a license under the rules of the state corporation, then you have only the privilege of driving on the roads. If you are fined for going 5 miles an hour too fast, it is best to pay it, for you have placed yourself under the legal rules and authority of the corporation. They can tell you what to do and punish you just the same as if you were employed by General Motors and broke one of their rules. By comparison, under the laws of the Constitution, you cannot be fined or penalized unless you injure someone or destroy someone's property and then are tried and found guilty by a jury. Thus, there is a conflict between the legal regulations of a corporate state and the laws of a constitutional government. Unfortunately, the corporate government has nearly destroyed the constitutional one. Corporate law is the same as maritime law or the law merchant. If you buy a ticket on a ship, it places you under the legal administration of the captain of the ship. All constitutional or foreign laws no longer have jurisdiction over you. If the captain sees fit to restrict you to your quarters or to limit your meals, legally you must obey him. Eustace Mullins observed, "Congressmen, like our judges, look upon the Constitution as an outmoded document which, in any case, has been totally replaced by Admiralty law or the law merchant. Under the law merchant, there is no legal stigma or prohibition against U.S. taxpayers' funds being spent for Jewish religious instruction, as the law merchant observes no Bill of Rights. Most of the bills enacted into law by the United States Congress base their legal validity upon the principles of the law merchant, the most notorious being the enactment of the Federal Reserve Act into law by Congress in 1913. The Federal Reserve Act openly violated the constitutional provision that only Congress should have the power to coin money, regulate the value thereof. Article 1, Section 8, The Rape of Justice, Mullins, page 478. Former FBI agent, Dan Smoot, said there was a secret government running things in America, but now the secret government has become the popularly accepted government, and the constitutional government has become the secret government. We are living at the time when we can see the fulfillment of Joseph Smith's prophecy that the Constitution of the United States will hang by a thread. The existence of these two powers and their jurisdictions should not be unfamiliar to us, as examples are found throughout the Bible. For instance, when Jesus went out into the wilderness, Satan came by for a visit. He showed him all the governments of the world and said, if he would join his corporation, Satan would let Christ be general manager over all of them. 8. Gun control. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. When the Founding Fathers of America decided to write a constitution, they first studied every government in the world, both ancient and modern. They analyzed the faults and failures of former nations as they didn't want to make the same mistakes. Every new system and concept, and every ancient style of government, were presented and debated by the most brilliant minds that ever forged a government. Even the issue of guns, their control, their purpose, and their benefits was hashed over. Following are some of the comments by these founding fathers on the issue of gun control. Thomas Jefferson, of Virginia, no free man shall ever be debarred the use of arms. Proposed Virginia Constitution, 1776. Laws that forbid the carrying of arms. Disarm only those who are neither inclined nor determined to commit crimes. Such laws make things worse for the assaulted and better for the assailants. They serve rather to encourage than to prevent homicides, for an unarmed man may be attacked with greater confidence than an armed man. Jefferson's Commonplace Book, 1774-1776, quoting from On Crimes and Punishment, by criminologist Cesar Beccaria. Samuel Adams, of Massachusetts, the said Constitution shall be never construed to authorize Congress to infringe the just liberty of the press, or the rights of conscience, or to prevent the people of the United States, who are peaceable citizens, from keeping their own arms. Massachusetts U.S. Constitution Ratification Convention, 1788. Alexander Hamilton, of New York. If circumstances should at any time oblige the government to form an army of any magnitude, that army can never be formidable to the liberties of the people, while there is a large body of citizens, little if at all inferior to them in discipline and the use of arms, who stand ready to defend their rights and those of their fellow citizens. The Federalist, number 29. Noah Webster, of Pennsylvania. Before a standing army can rule, the people must be disarmed, as they are in almost every kingdom in Europe. The supreme power in America cannot enforce unjust laws by the sword, because the whole body of the people are armed and constitute a force superior to any band of regular troops that can be, on any pretense, raised in the United States. A military force, at the command of Congress, can execute no laws but such as the people perceive to be just and constitutional, for they will possess the power. An examination of the leading principles of the Federal Constitution, Philadelphia, 1787. James Madison, of Virginia. The Constitution preserves the advantage of being armed which Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation. Where the governments are afraid to trust the people with arms. The Federalist, number 46. Elbridge Gerry, of Massachusetts. What, sir, is the use of militia? It is to prevent the establishment of a standing army, the bane of liberty. Whenever government means to invade the rights and liberties of the people, they always attempt to destroy the militia in order to raise a standing army upon its ruins. Debate, U.S. House of Representatives, August 17, 1789. Fisher Ames, of Massachusetts. The rights of conscience, of bearing arms, of changing the government, are declared to be inherent in the people. Letter to F.R. Minot, June 12, 1789. Richard Henry Lee, of Virginia. A militia when properly formed are in fact the people themselves. And include all men capable of bearing arms. To preserve liberty it is essential that the whole body of people always possess arms. The mind that aims at a select militia must be influenced by a truly anti-republican principle. Additional letters from the Federal Farmer, 1788. George Mason, of Virginia. When the resolution of enslaving America was formed in Great Britain, the British Parliament was advised by an artful man, who was governor of Pennsylvania, to disarm the people, that it was the best and most effectual way to enslave them, but that they should not do it openly, but weaken them, and let them sink gradually. I ask, who are the militia? They consist now of the whole people, except a few public officers. Virginia's U.S. Constitution Ratification Convention, 1788. Tench Cox, of Pennsylvania. The militia, who are in fact the effective part of the people at large, will render many troops quite unnecessary. They will form a powerful check upon the regular troops, and will generally be sufficient to overawe them. An American Citizen, October 21, 1787. Who are the militia? Are they not ourselves? Congress have no power to disarm the militia. Their swords and every other terrible implement of the soldier are the birthright of an American. The unlimited power of the sword is not in the hands of either the federal or state governments, but, where I trust in God it will ever remain, in the hands of the people. The Pennsylvania Gazette, February 20, 1788. Thomas Paine, of Pennsylvania. Arms discourage and keep the invader and plunderer in awe, and preserve order in the world as well as property. Horrid mischief would ensue, were the law-abiding deprived of the use of them. Thoughts on Defensive War, 1775. Patrick Henry, of Virginia. Guard with jealous attention the public liberty. Suspect everyone who approaches that jewel. Virginia's U.S. Constitution Ratification Convention. A gun, in and of itself, is not a bad thing. It's the operator of the weapon that determines the outcome. Guns have been used for thousands of years in sports and for personal defense. Just as automobiles are today a wonderful necessity, but in the hands of a crazy drunk, they can become deadly. In the early years of our nation, the government requested people to have and be trained in the use of guns, but recently the government has been trying to regulate them and even take them out of the hands of the American people. At the same time, they have been shipping arms, ammunition, and strategic military guidance systems to our most potential enemies. The news media is continually reporting stories about the wrongful use of guns, rather than stories about the proper use of them. We have all heard the account of the Littleton School episode, but the media has never told the story about the people in a Shoney restaurant in Anniston, Alabama. Two armed men burst into this restaurant and herded the patrons and employees into a walk-in refrigerator at gunpoint. The robbers kept the manager behind, so he could assist them in looting the place. One patron, Thomas Glenn Terry, however, had hidden himself under a table. While one robber was going through the safe, the other patrolled the place and discovered Terry. But Terry had his own legally concealed weapon, which he pulled out and shot the one robber. And as the other one came toward him, Terry shot him also. The 24 patrons and employees were released unharmed from the refrigerator. Only the criminals, with stolen guns by the way, never made it out alive. In recent years there has been a movement to legislate total gun control. Every time someone was killed by a gun, another demand was made to take guns away from civilians. However, FBI reports show that criminals using guns represent less than 2% of the population, and that 99.8% of firearms and 99.6% of handguns will not be used to commit violent crimes in any given year. It is obvious that criminals will not jump at the chance to register, nor give up their guns. Thus, at this point, gun confiscation would take guns away from the very people who do not commit the crimes. The recent killers at Littleton School broke 27 laws governing guns. Would more laws against guns have prevented this massacre? Ironically, crime is reduced in proportion to the number of guns in the hands of the citizens. The following simple facts show that guns are in reality a deterrent to crime. Arrest rate of Washington, D.C. police officers, 19 per 1,000. Arrest rate of New York City police officers, 3 per 1,000. Arrest rate of Florida concealed handgun permit holders, 0.9 per 1,000. Simply stated, guns mean protection. Without guns there is very little, if any, protection. A stack of guns 100 feet high would never harm anyone in 1,000 years. They are inanimate. Police have guns and criminals have guns, so why do we support one and fear the other? The United States has about 500,000 police officers with only about 100,000 on duty at a time. This makes only one officer for every 35 square miles. Emergency 911 is no substitute for effective self-defense. In 1976, Washington, D.C. enacted a virtual ban on all handguns. By 1991, 15 years later, their homicide rate had tripled. The states that have right to carry gun laws have a lower violent crime rate compared to the other states. Consider the following statistics. Right to carry states have a 24% lower total violent crime rate. They have a 19% lower homicide rate. They have a 39% lower robbery rate. They have a 19% lower aggravated assault rate. Professors John R. Lott Jr. and David B. Mustard at the University of Chicago have concluded that allowing citizens to carry concealed weapons deters violent crimes, and it appears to produce no increase in accidental deaths. More guns, less crime, 1998. The right to carry firearms is an individual's constitutional right. The Supreme Court has so ruled in the following cases: U.S. v. Cruikshank, 1876, Presser v. Illinois, 1886, Miller v. Texas, 1894, U.S. v. Miller, 1939, and U.S. v. Verdugo-Urquidez, 1990. What do the American people think in regard to gun control? 85% of Americans believe people should have the right to use firearms to defend themselves in their homes. 64% favor allowing law-abiding citizens to carry firearms for personal protection outside their homes. 72% favor stiffer sentences for criminals who use a gun in crime, rather than more gun laws. Survey of Registered Voters, Lawrence Research, 1998. A survey by criminologist Gary Kleck showed that 2.5 million people use firearms for protection each year. The National Center for Health Statistics shows that the fatal firearm accident rate has been going down each year. It also shows that other causes of accidents are much greater than firearm casualties. Per thousand, the rate is motor vehicles, 16.3. Falls, 5.6. Poisonings, 3.6. Drowning, 9.5. Fires, 3.7. Choking on food, etc., 3.2. Medical mistakes, 2.9. Firearm accidents, 1.1. Anyone who is a constitutionalist, a patriot, or a conservative is being called radical right-winger and extremist. Seldom mentioned are the radical left-wingers who are trying to destroy the Constitution. An example of this extreme position is Rosie O'Donnell, who in her television talk show responded to a visitor, "I don't care if you want to hunt. I don't care if you think it's your right. I say, sorry, it's 1999. We have had enough as a nation. You are not allowed to own a gun, and if you do own a gun, I think you should go to prison. Sometimes, however, a respondent gets the better of the situation, such as in the case on National Public Radio between a female broadcaster and U.S. Army Lieutenant Gen. Rienwald, about sponsoring a Boy Scout troop on his military installation. Female interviewer, so, LTG. Rienwald, what are you going to do with these young boys on their adventure holiday? LTG, we're going to teach them climbing, canoeing, archery, and shooting. Interviewer. Shooting. That's a bit irresponsible, isn't it? LTG, I don't see why. They'll be properly supervised on the range. Interviewer, don't you admit that this is a terribly dangerous activity to be teaching children? LTG, I don't see how. We will be teaching them proper range discipline before they even touch a firearm. Interviewer, but you're equipping them to become violent killers. LTG, Rienwald, well, you're equipped to be a prostitute, but you're not one, are you? End of interview. Some of the laws being suggested are as follows. 1. Requiring licenses for all gun owners. 2. Establishing a federally owned arsenal for all guns. 3. Setting up mandatory inspection of all premises for guns. 4. Banning private gun manufacturers. 5. Banning sales of all gun parts. 6. Banning all firearms except on target ranges. 7. Banning all gun relics. 8. Placing a federal control over all ammunition. 9. Banning all gunpowder. 10. Banning all gun shows. Another new law has been suggested which would allow citizens to sue the gun manufacturers for any damages caused by criminals. In Brooklyn, New York, the amount of $520,000 was awarded against gun manufacturers. Chicago Mayor Richard Daley is demanding $433 million in damages, claiming that firearm manufacturers are a public nuisance. In Dade County, Florida, Mayor Alex Pinella said it was time to send the bills for gun deaths and gun injuries to the gunmakers. However, facts soon came out that gun permit holders jumped from 1,200 to 28,000, while violent crimes declined drastically. The battle of the guns is growing, but not against criminals who use them, but against innocent citizens who own them. It seems that every organization, religion, or business has some legitimate legal complaint against the encroachments of the federal government. Our government was established to protect our rights, not restrict them. Citizens from farmers to hunters are complaining. In a recent drive for memberships in the National Rifle Association, headed by Charlton Heston, President, and Wayne LaPierre, Vice President, their letters included the following statements: "There has never been a more important time for America's gun owners to unite and stand up for our freedom." President Clinton is aggressively pushing Congress to pass more harsh anti-gun legislation. And his administration is filled with thousands of anti-gun and anti-hunting political appointees determined to use the federal bureaucracy to harass law-abiding gun owners and whittle away at our rights. Only a united effort by freedom-loving Americans can stop this assault on our rights from doing irreversible damage to our freedoms. Our goal is to build a firewall around the Second Amendment by recruiting at least 10,000 NRA members in each congressional district. Each NRA member we sign up means more leverage to convince the politicians to keep their hands off the Second Amendment. The right to bear arms did not mean that Americans could go out and shoot redcoats or hunt for Bambi. It was given as a protection against government, any government including our own. A good government should support citizens being trained to use guns so they would be prepared in case of war. Today there are about 80 million Americans who own over 200 million guns. That represents the largest standing army in the world, including Russia and China combined. So far this has protected America from being attacked. To disarm its citizens would be an open invitation for our overthrow either by external or internal forces. Who are the main people behind gun confiscation? Why would they want to disarm the American people? Who wants to do away with the Second Amendment of the Constitution? Could they be conspirators trying to overthrow America? Only corrupt and controlling governments want to take away guns from its people. Both Hitler and Stalin took away civilian guns. Mao Zedong took away guns from everyone except his army. Is there a message in all of this? Jesus spoke of our day, saying that there shall be wars and rumors of wars, and nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. Matt. 24:6-7. It would be a time of civil unrest, revolutions and roving mobs. Everyone will need to defend himself and his property. Isaiah said that after this time, men will learn war no more, and they will beat their swords into plowshares. Isa. 2:4. However, before that time, Joel spoke of it in reverse by advising, "Beat your plowshares into swords, and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, 'I am strong.'" Joel 3:10. The prophet Joseph Smith said this would apply to our time. The prediction is that army will be against army. It may be that the saints will have to beat their plows into swords, for it will not do for men to sit down patiently and see their children destroyed. TPJS, page 366. The very presence of a gun may be the means of saving lives and property. The purpose of the Second Amendment is to guarantee specific rights and duties. The founders added this amendment to the Constitution so that when there is a long train of abuses on citizens' rights, they have the responsibility and duty to protect and recover those rights. However, if the government has all the weapons, they can do whatever they want, right or wrong. When a government does not trust its citizens, then the citizens should not trust their government. If the American people cannot be trusted with the objects and means to protect their liberty, then they cannot be trusted with liberty itself. If the Clinton-Gore administration destroys all private weapons in this country, then America will become a continual care center governed by those kind of people. The Second Amendment rights are a sacred trust because of their connection to the higher rights and higher duties given by our God. Surrender of our rights is a surrender of the divine principle of dignity under God, and we will then reap the consequences of servitude and slavery. 9. Communism. The whole damned world is going communist. The Russians give me the impression of something that is to be feared in future world political reorganization. Gen. George S. Patton, The Unknown Patton, pages 187-88. Communism began as a result of the writings of Karl Marx, who was born in Trier, Germany, in May 1818. He was a brilliant student and eventually drifted into journalism. He acidly poured out ridicule against everything and everyone. He became an atheist and called for war against religion. He was an advocate of materialism. He resumed the editorship of a left-wing newspaper in Cologne and wrote against the German government, getting him into trouble. He left for France and in 1849 went to England, where he met a former friend, Friedrich Engels. Engels provided much information for programs of revolutionary tactics and ideals for a new world order. These were not new ideas, but came from previous conspirators whose objectives were the same. Other prominent persons helped to promote this world movement, known as scientific socialism, i.e., Lenin and Stalin. 1. Edgar Hoover explained this New World Society, communism, Marx proclaimed, represented the new synthesis of the capitalist proletariat struggle and the apex of all history. At this point, said Marx, conflict would now cease, although, again, he does not say why. This new world would be the perfect and final society, stateless, classless, godless, where all property used in production would be held in common, and human activities would conform to the principle from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. Marx, with shrewd cunning, applied these concepts to the society of his day. He aimed this appeal to catch everyone who was greedy, ambitious, discontented, or downtrodden. Also, since the Industrial Revolution had led to some very real social abuses, the doctrines of Marx appealed to many sincere idealists and reformers who were impatient with slower and more gradual methods of improvement. Masters of Deceit, J. Edgar Hoover, page 20. Communism is the outward expression of conspirators' inward plotting. One designs the blueprint and the other creates the building. One is the muscle, the other is the brain. Communism would have died many times if it had not been for top intellectuals handling its survival. The infamous banking, business and political machinery took care of communism's welfare in its sickness, poverty and ignorance. It could not have stood by itself. Today wars could stop, poverty could be alleviated, and freedom could be enjoyed by everyone if our financial, business, and political leaders really wanted them. But the devil must be represented on the earth, and communism has been his greatest achievement. Many people have given their lives to build up communism, but many more have lost their lives because of it. Intellectual minds have struggled all their lives to build on this corrupt and evil power. The ideal of a world all under one government, even without freedom, has drawn men to devote their money, time, and efforts to create this monster of death and destruction. Many have even devoted their lives to it, but never lived to see the final result. Many collaborators helped to gather material for the publication of this World Order program. It was eventually put together in a famous book in 1848 called the Communist Manifesto, which detailed the program for a world to win. It calls for subversive action against all governments in order to form a government of their own. In 1864 they formed the first international organization that was later called the Communist Party USA, and by 1872 they moved from London to New York. Their objective was to own one nation first, and then a few others, to carry out by force their objectives with all other nations. Lenin was in Russia and the programmer saw ample reason for a revolution there, so planned a takeover of that nation. Lenin was exposed, arrested, and put in jail for 5 years. When he was released, he fled the country, but still worked in support of the same plan, to overthrow the Russian government. Materials and propaganda were printed and smuggled into the Russian underground. All who worked for this one world dominion had to be totally dedicated. Furthermore, nothing was wrong, evil or unlawful, if it served the purpose of the cause and the perpetrators did not shrink from any crime. From their own ideals they instilled in their followers that they could use any means, even violence or murder, to assist in the world revolution. In their printed orders it was stated, use any weapon to achieve your aim. A man is your friend or your foe. Find out quickly. If a friend, clasp his hand, that is as long as he serves a purpose. If a foe, take drastic action. Communist Manifesto. Finally a plan had been worked out for over 20 years, and now it was about to be put into force. The German army had defeated the Russian troops, and the Tsar's government was teetering. This was a signal for all revolutionaries to go to Petrograd. In 1917 Lenin came from Switzerland, Trotsky for New York, and Stalin was already in Russia. Besides Jacob Schitt, other international bankers involved in the financing of the communist takeover of Russia were Olaf Ashberg of the Nye Banken of Stockholm, the Rhine-Westphalian Syndicate, and a wealthy banker named Zhivatovsky whose daughter later married Leon Trotsky. However, the chief European funding came from Max Warburg of Germany, whose two brothers, Felix and Paul Warburg, had moved to New York. Felix Warburg had become Jacob Schitt's son-in-law and Paul Warburg became Solomon Loeb's son-in-law. They both became partners in the Kuhn, Loeb, and Company. Paul Warburg, it will be recalled, had also been the principal promoter of the Federal Reserve System in the United States. Between the Warburgs and Schitts the money flowing to the communist revolutionaries must have been substantial. Secrets of the Federal Reserve, Eustace Mullins, page 41. To take over the Soviet Union would require a revolution which takes a lot of money, and the 1917 revolution in Moscow was no exception. The Bolshevik Revolution was not a spontaneous uprising of the masses. It was planned, financed, and orchestrated by outsiders. Some of the financing came from Germany, which hoped that internal problems would force Russia out of the war against her. But most of the money and leadership came from financiers in England and the United States. It was a perfect example of the Rothschild formula in action. This group centered mainly around a secret society created by Cecil Rhodes, one of the world's wealthiest men at the time. The purpose of that group was nothing less than world dominion and the establishment of a modern feudalist society controlled by the world's central banks. Headquartered in England, the Rhodes innermost directorate was called the Round Table. In other countries, there were established subordinate structures called Round Table groups. The Round Table Group in the United States became known as the Council on Foreign Relations. The CFR, which was initially dominated by J.P. Morgan and later by the Rockefellers, is the most powerful group in America today. It is even more powerful than the federal government because almost all of the key positions in government are held by its members. In other words, it is the United States government. The Creature from Jekyll Island, G. Edward Griffin, page 283.